Chapter 1174. You have to compensate me. Is it really that easy to go back? Yi Zichen stood by the campfire and clenched his fists, waiting for the warlock's answer. If he really returned to his 19-year-old self, Yi Zichen swore he'd never enter the Red Packet group again. Even if he did, he'd leave it as soon as possible. All of this was like a butterfly effect. His entry into the group directly affected the changes of everyone around him. Of course, this was all based on the premise that he could go back. Thinking about it, the God Emperor could easily take the 5 elements Great Emperor's celestial fate. Compared to the God Emperor's, his wish was far inferior. Given the warlock's strength, he could definitely do it. As he considered this, Yi Zichen was filled with confidence in the warlock. However, a full hour passed. Yi Zichen had no idea how many times the warlock had snapped his fingers. After one snap, he snapped another. The cycle repeated itself. Mr. Devil, can I go back now? Previously, the warlock hadn't taken more than a minute to fulfill his wish. However, the warlock had dragged on for a full hour. Yi Zichen couldn't help but frown. The warlock's large eyes darted back and forth in their sockets, but he didn't come to a conclusion. He grimaced in pain, and wrinkles covered his forehead. How strange. Little did he know, as Yi Zichen urged him on, the warlock was muttering to himself. He'd tried to establish a connection with the time corridor and send Yi Zichen back to when he was 19, but his attempts were like rocks sinking into the ocean. There was no response at all. He'd been in the time corridor for so long, but he'd never encountered anything so strange. What on earth went wrong? The warlock muttered to himself. Yi Zichen, who'd been waiting anxiously outside, spoke up again. Mr. Devil, are you done? Strange. The warlock muttered to himself. He'd tried tens of thousands of times to no avail, so he'd lost his patience. When he thought back to how confident he'd been, and how much he'd accepted, the warlock couldn't help but chuckle. Something went wrong, a small problem. The warlock scratched his head in embarrassment. In all his years, he'd never felt so awkward before. What do you mean something went wrong? Yi Zichen's expression was somewhat unfriendly. It's like this. There's a small problem between the time corridor and me, the Great Pilar. I've tried to communicate with him, but I can't get a response. I have no choice but to apologize to you. So you're saying that you can't fulfill my wish? Although this was definitely a huge stain in the life of a sorcerer, he had to admit it. Yes. Heh. Yi Zichen laughed. Kid, don't be too disappointed. The warlock walked up to Yi Zichen and put his hands on his hip. Although I wasn't able to fulfill your wish this time, I, the Great Pilar, will remember this humiliation. Once I, the Great Pilar, reconnect with the time corridor, I will find a way to find you and fulfill your wish. The warlock's tone was still as confident as ever. Yi Zichen looked down at the warlock, who barely reached his waist, and slapped him. What are you still playing dumb for? I've realized that my brain hasn't been working well lately. How could I have believed your nonsense? The warlock was small to begin with. Yi Zichen's slap sent him flying into the time corridor's walls. There was a loud bang. How dare you? The warlock slammed into the wall, clutched his head, then pointed at Yi Zichen, eyes spitting fire. You actually dared hit the Great Pilar? When I return to my kingdom, I'll have my people kill you. Ha! In the face of the warlock's threats, Yi Zichen put on an exaggerated expression, reached out and slapped the warlock's head. The slap sent the wizard flying a few meters away. The wizard was still roaring angrily. He roared indignantly, "The Great Pilar won't forgive you. My kingdom." Bang! Yi Zichen was met with another slap. He stuck his hands in his pockets and cocked his head at the warlock. Someone like you has a kingdom? Aya, that really scared me to death. And the Great Pilar, why are you Puerti? If you were Puerti, you might still have some value. You keep saying Pilar, and I can satisfy your desires. You say you don't have the ability, so what are you pretending for? The Great Shut up. Yi Zichen slapped him again. After a few slaps, the warlock didn't make any more noise. However, his expression was still furious. What the F***ck are you talking about? Let me tell you, right now, I'm the greatest. You look like a freak, yet you're still pretending to be human. I almost fell for your lies. Fortunately, I only lost 3 strands of hair. If I lost an arm or a leg, I'd be so mad I'd die. Hey, deformed freak, tell me, are all the people in your world as deformed as you? What race do you belong to? I don't think even the beastmen are as ugly as you. I'm not a freak, I'm the Great Pilar. Call me Mr. Devil. The warlock stomped his feet in anger. He, the Great Pilar, had never suffered such humiliation. His dignity couldn't be trampled on. However, the instant Yi Zichen raised his hand, he cowered. When he saw the warlock's cowardice, Yi Zichen sighed in relief. After a moment's thought, he decided to let it go. He narrowed his eyes at the warlock. Sensing his gaze, the warlock backed away. What are you trying to do? The Great Pilar isn't afraid of you. Don't be nervous. Relax. Yi Zichen looked up. The warlock hurriedly covered his head with his hands and closed his eyes. Before long, however, Yi Zichen merely patted him on the shoulder and smiled warmly at him. I won't hit you again. Don't be afraid. The warlock's expression changed somewhat, and he puffed up his chest disdainfully. The Great Pilar's heart never shows fear. All right, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid. Yi Zichen smiled and nodded, then patted him on the shoulder. How about this? You see, a deal has to be fair, right? Of course. I gave you 3 strands of hair, but you didn't fulfill my wish. In that case, shouldn't you make it up to me in some way? What kind of compensation do you want? Right now, the Great Pilar can't contact the Time Corridor, but if you can wait, I'll definitely make it up to your satisfaction, replied the warlock. Chapter 1175. Chapter 1175. Demonic Scriptures. Yi Zichen shook his shoulders like a scoundrel, then grabbed the man's hand and reached forward. The warlock backed away uneasily. Yi Zichen's ferocious demeanor made him feel uneasy. He really didn't want to be slapped again. The Great Pilar couldn't tolerate such humiliation. Then what do you want as compensation? The Great Pilar can give you back your hair. As he spoke, the warlock moved to retrieve the strands of hair Yi Zichen had tossed into the bonfire. However, to Yi Zichen, hair was an insignificant price to pay. Just taking back 3 strands of hair would be too much of a loss. Given his personality, he couldn't let go of even the slightest advantage. This was truly unacceptable. Yi Zichen raised his hand and stopped the warlock's movements. He looked him up and down, then looked him up and down timidly. If it's your hair, I don't want it. You don't even have a single strand of hair on your body, so I'll leave it to you. 3 strands of hair won't be a bad idea. Then what do you want? The Great Pilar has nothing to give you, replied the warlock. Then it looks like you want to get beaten up. Yi Zichen's unfriendly gaze landed on the warlock. Instantly, he felt the entire time corridor's temperature plummet. Under that gaze, his entire body felt uneasy. His hand groped around under the loose black cloak. When his hand came out of the cloak, there was a pitch-black book in his hand. He reluctantly handed it over. Yi Zichen arched his brows and placed his hand on the book. He wanted to take it back, but was met with resistance. Only then did he realize that the warlock was clenching the book tightly. He was unwilling to hand it over. The warlock's eyes narrowed. He instinctively shook his hand, and the book flew out of his grasp and into Yi Zichen's. Even though it was in Yi Zichen's hands, the warlock stared intently at it, his gaze filled with reluctance. Yi Zichen was rather curious. Just what was so special about the book that it could force the warlock to go this far? Demonic Secret Manual. The pitch-black book was engraved with 4 blood-red words. Yi Zichen flipped open the tome and discovered that it was a manual for condensing a Dharma body. The supreme Dharma body was the only way to become a supreme being expert. What a coincidence! He was just wondering where to find the secret manual for the supreme Dharma body, and now this shaman had directly given him one. I wonder what rank this evil magic god is? Yi Zichen put the secret tome into his spatial ring, then walked around the warlock a few more times. What do you want? The Great Pilar has already compensated you. The warlock yelled at the top of his lungs, but his anger had no effect on Yi Zichen at all. It merely boosted his courage. Yi Zichen licked his lips, then tilted his head and looked at him. I don't even know how to use that stupid secret manual. What kind of compensation is this? You actually dare to slander the treasures left behind by Lord Devil. You will anger Lord Devil. You will not have a good ending. Scram. Yi Zichen slapped the warlock's head and frowned. Hurry up and compensate me. Otherwise, I'm afraid your life won't belong to you anymore. The Great Pilar has nothing else to offer, replied the warlock sincerely. The warlock replied sincerely, but could Yi Zichen really believe him? He couldn't. Right now, he was playing the role of a bandit. How could a bandit hold back just because his opponent said he had no treasures? There was no way he'd get the warlock to willingly hand over his treasures. It seemed he'd have to take matters into his own hands. Yi Zichen reached out with his left hand and picked the warlock up. His right hand burrowed into his loose black robes and searched around. You're insulting the Great Pilar. Shut up. Yi Zichen frowned and stopped him. He searched around for a long time, but couldn't find a spatial ring. In the end, he simply ripped off the warlock's robes and stripped him naked. He really is that poor. Yi Zichen couldn't help but shake his head when he saw the warlock without so much as a single gold coin on him. The Great Pilar. I will definitely get my revenge. The naked warlock curled up in a corner of the time corridor. He looked like a woman who'd just been violated. His expression was far too easy to misunderstand. Yi Zichen hurriedly tossed the black robes to the warlock, lest the alien stare at him too much. Didn't you say you had a kingdom? How are you so poor? Forget it, I can't be bothered to argue with you. A great man of great virtue will forgive a lowly man like you. Consider that secret tome your compensation. Although I suffered a bit, who told me to be so soft-hearted? Don't you agree? Yi Zichen reached out and tousled the warlock's hair, then put his hands in his pockets and smiled. Get me out of here. If I stay here any longer, I don't know what else I'll do to you. When he recalled Yi Zichen's earlier actions, the warlock couldn't help but shrink back. These memories might become a nightmare for him in the future. He didn't want this demon to stay here for even half a second longer. Yi Zichen snapped his fingers, and a door suddenly opened in the time corridor. Go. The Great Pilar doesn't want to see you here. The warlock pointed at the door and roared. When Yi Zichen saw this, he pursed his lips into a smile, then walked up to the door and waved. Until we meet again. Even as he left, the warlock maintained his furious expression. Soon afterwards, he was suddenly stunned. He looked at the opening door of the time corridor, and then looked at his hand. Their connection had been re-established. After leaving the time corridor, Yi Zichen appeared in a beautiful place filled with birdsong and fragrant flowers. This was no longer the primordial chaos beneath the Milky Way, nor was it the pitch-black walls of the time corridor. This place was lush and lush, unlike the upper three realms' ancient trees and jagged rock. He could faintly hear the cries of birds in the distance. Yi Zichen even saw a squirrel hugging a pine cone and looking at him with an amused expression. This peaceful scene didn't exist in the upper three realms, which were like stagnant water. He knew he'd returned. Compared to the spiritual energy in the lower lands, Yi Zichen discovered that the spiritual energy here was no less sparse. Only the Sky Great District could compare. Yi Zichen knew full well that this was all because of the ley line. He stretched lazily, then swiped his finger through the air. The surrounding space seemed to have lost all its tenacity in front of his fingers, allowing him to draw a crack in it. When he saw this, Yi Zichen hurriedly stopped. As expected, the difference in tenacity between the upper 3 realms and the lower 3 realms was like night and day. So long as he willed it, he could destroy this entire world with a wave of his hand. This was a supreme. He gazed off into the distance. Maple City was directly to the north of him. After a while, Yi Zichen suppressed his complicated emotions and smiled. Chapter 1176. Chapter 1176. Yi Zichen's return. After becoming a supreme, Yi Zichen could effortlessly teleport within the 3 realms. However, he wasn't in such a rush to return. Instead, he took a stroll through the world. This should be the Beast region's territory. After a brief stroll, Yi Zichen was certain he'd landed in the Beast region. Almost instinctively, he arrived at the dragon race's Dragon City. He stood in the sky and looked down at every blade of grass and tree. This was where he'd once fought the demons. As far as the eye could see, the scars left behind when he'd used Xianyuan slash to cleave apart the black dragon were still there. The flattened mountain ranges were exactly the same as they'd been half a year ago. Before long, he arrived at a patch of scorched forest. This was where he'd undergone his tribulation. This was also where Xia Kiki had forcefully broken free from her tribulation in order to protect him. Yi Zichen gently brushed his hand over a tree trunk. After a few sighs, he looked around fondly. He left. He lowered his gaze and shot through the Beast region. Even though he intentionally slowed down, it still took him less than an hour to reach the outskirts of the Immortal region's Maple City. Yi Zichen had even more memories of this place. When he'd first set foot in the 3 realms, he'd landed in a village outside Maple City. He'd brought the entire village with him to Maple City. He'd met Zuemo, and a series of events had happened there. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say this was his second home. Closer to home, the more timid he felt. Yi Zichen felt that way. He hid in the clouds and looked down at the city beneath his feet. His emotions were complicated. However, strange. The once prosperous and peaceful city had been filled with a solemn aura in the past few days. Everyone walked around in a hurry, and the shops on either side of the street were closed, refusing to entertain customers. Yi Zichen's statue in the center of the city was half destroyed. Although the surrounding rubble had been cleared away, the statue hadn't been repaired. "Oh, Shui, what do you think we should do now?" A brawny, bare-armed man with thick eyebrows and fierce eyes sat in a chair in front of a stone table. He was tall and sturdy to begin with, so when he sat, he looked like a small mountain. Opposite him was a refined man in a green robe. The man's eyebrows were tightly knitted and his thin lips were tightly pursed. "Even if you ask me now, I wouldn't be able to give you an answer." The burly man knitted his brows. He was actually one of the founding members of the Leisure House, Stone. The person opposite him was the current head of the Leisure House, Xueqi. Now they were in a rather troublesome situation. What was more serious was that they did not have the ability to end this storm. "Bro, the people from the Immortal region and the Beast region have all arrived." Just as they were frowning in silence, Xuelan walked in wearing a plain dress. Hearing this, Stone and Xueqi glanced at each other, then got up from their chairs and walked out. "Everyone, sorry for the long wait." When Xueqi and Rockhead arrived at the front hall, there were already quite a few people standing there. The people in the front hall also cupped their hands towards him. Xueqi directly walked in front of them and looked at them. "I believe everyone knows the current situation. I wonder if anyone has any good suggestions?" Unexpectedly, everyone in the hall revealed a troubled expression. After a long while, one of the elders from the Beast region spoke up. "If everything is as Sect Head Shui says, and the events of 100 years ago are about to repeat themselves, then all we can do is stubbornly resist. The ley line is the foundation of the 3 realms. We can't hand it over to the demons. But that's 1,000 immortal kings." The atmosphere in the hall grew heavy once more. This place could not compare to the upper 3 realms. Immortal kings were as common as cabbages. Although the ley line supported the entire 3 realms, there were less than 1,000 immortal kings in total. In the past 100 years, the leaders of the various realms had all ascended one after another. There were practically no truly peerless experts left. How could they possibly resist the pressure of 3,000 demon kings? Back then, we only managed to repel the demons because of Emperor Yi. At the time, we also had the 4 sacred beast clan heads, the head of the 100 Flowers Gate, and other peerless experts to quell the storm. But now, the atmosphere in the hall was as cold as ice. Xueqi furrowed his brows. He didn't want to see everyone so dispirited, but that was the truth. He couldn't allow this sort of atmosphere to continue. He pursed his lips, wanting to say something to raise morale. However, just as he was about to speak, he froze, as if he'd been struck by lightning. Oil Shue. Stone was the first to notice his expression. He patted his shoulder. Xueqi stood there, dumbfounded. After a long while, he frowned at Stone and the others in the hall. Everyone, the crisis has been completely resolved. You can now return to your clans in peace. I'm going to see someone, so I won't be seeing you off. Under everyone's confused gazes, Xueqi turned to leave. Stone frowned, hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Who is it?" Xueqi didn't speak. He simply mouthed the person's name. When he saw the shape of his lips, Stone froze as if he'd been electrocuted. In the blink of an eye, his eyes filled with wild joy. The rest of the people were still at a loss. How could the crisis be resolved so suddenly? "Brother Stone, what on earth is going on?" Stone clenched his fists tightly. He couldn't conceal the excitement on his face. He grinned at the people around him and laughed. "Do you know who Xueqi is going to see?" "Who?" "Yi Zichen. In the maple forest outside Maple City." Dried red leaves littered the ground. Yi Zichen leaned against a tree trunk and stood atop one. Xueqi hurriedly appeared in the forest and immediately spotted Yi Zichen. "Yi." "Xueqi, long time no see." As soon as he finished speaking, Xueqi pulled him into a bear hug. "So you really didn't die?" Xueqi's eyes lit up with delight. "Back when you sealed away the vicious beast, we all felt like you couldn't have died so easily, given your abilities. A few years ago, you were the one who helped the 100 Flowers Gate resolve their problems, weren't you?" "You know?" Yi Zichen was shocked. "When you attacked, someone recorded it. Li Jie Anzwa Mo saw it through the jade slip. They were very certain that it was you," Xueqi said with a faint smile. "What have you been doing all these years? Why haven't you come looking for us?" Just what had I done in the past 100 years?" Yi Zichen sighed emotionally. If he really had to explain, not even 3 days and 3 nights would be enough. Besides, he didn't want to talk about it. Yi Zichen smiled calmly, but didn't tell his story. Instead, he frowned at the solemn atmosphere of Maple City. Chapter 1177. Trouble. The cool breeze rustled through the maple forest, and the maple leaves on the ground danced along with the cyclone of the cool breeze. Xueqi gazed off into the distance at Maple City, which was bathed in a layer of silver light thanks to the ley line. He leaned against a tree trunk and chuckled. "There's nothing wrong with the city, it's just that there's something wrong with the ley line. It's a good thing you came back. If you hadn't, forget about Maple City, even the entire 3 realms would have suffered a fatal blow." Xueqi smiled faintly and felt much more at ease. Not long ago, he'd been worried about the demon's invasion and couldn't sleep at all. Now that Yi Zichen was back, he could finally relax. The ley line. He probed the ley line with his divine sense. When it sensed Yi Zichen's divine sense, the ley line responded affectionately. "What's wrong with it?" Xueqi smiled. "You should know that our leisure house has been growing stronger and stronger over the past 100 years, but we're still a bit weak in terms of top-notch strength. Previously, the people of the 3 realms took care of us out of respect for you, but a few years ago, the 100 Flowers Gates Li Jie ascended as well. She ascended too? Yi Zichen had an indescribable feeling for Li Jiai. Their relationship was also unclear. They could be considered more than friends, but not lovers. Back in the modern realm, she'd intentionally left a birthmark on her face to make people think she was ugly. She was a bit timid, but in the end, after the 100 Flowers Gate's head passed away, she shouldered the heavy responsibility of being the head of the 100 Flowers Gate. The memories of the past were still vivid in his mind. He hadn't expected that by the time he returned, she'd already ascended. That's right. Although Li Jiai had the title of the head's disciple, she'd always kept a low profile. However, after she became the head of the 100 Flowers Gate, her shocking talent was on full display. In just 100 years, she expanded the 100 Flowers Gate by more than 10 times, said Xueqi emotionally. Under Li Jiai's leadership, the 100 Flowers Gate's transformation truly amazed him. It wasn't just him. Everyone in the immortal region sighed in admiration. Previously, when no one from the 100 Flowers Gate could hold up the banner, she suppressed her strength and refused to undergo her tribulation. However, 10 years ago, a genius girl suddenly appeared in the 100 Flowers Gate. 3 years ago, she became an immortal king, and Li Jiai ascended. However, after she ascended, our leisure house and the Dragon's Vein came in trouble. Where did this trouble come from? Asked Yi Zichen. Actually, you'll understand if I explain it to you. Sometimes, a faction's reputation determines the resources and wealth it can create. The reason why our leisure house became a peak force was all because of the support of the various realms, as well as the support of the 100 Flowers Gate and the Treasure Tower, said Xueqi. Yi Zichen nodded. In terms of peak strength, our leisure house is much weaker than many other forces. After Li Jiai ascended, there was a new faction whose leader, Zheng Chong, was an expert at the pinnacle of the Immortal King realm. It's just that they haven't dared to make a move against us because they're our allies. But not long ago, Zheng Chong somehow made contact with the demons. He has 3,000 Immortal King-level demon subordinates at his disposal. A few days ago, he wanted us to hand over the Dragon's Vein to him. Xueqi shrugged helplessly. How could he possibly deal with several thousand Immortal King-level experts? If Zheng Chong wanted to use them as a stepping stone, he could back down. But Zheng Chong wanted the Dragon's Vein. It was the foundation of the 3 realms. How could they possibly give it to him? 3,000 demon kings? Killing intent flashed through Yi Zichen's eyes. There was no need to think too much about it. It was highly likely that they'd been brought down by the demon realm. Instead of fighting for the Xianyuan sword, they'd sent 3,000 demon kings to steal the Dragon's Vein. And then there were the gods. There was no way they didn't know what the demons were up to, yet they didn't send reinforcements. It seemed that in their eyes, humans who hadn't become gods really were nothing more than ants. 3,000 demon kings. If it were a few days ago, he might not have had much of a chance of victory against them. But now he was a supreme. In the lower 3 realms, the demon kings could do as they pleased, but in front of him, a supreme. He didn't even need the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Even if there were 30,000 of them, he could wipe them out with a wave of his hand. After all, they weren't even on the same level. Interesting. Yi Zichen's lips curled into a smile, but his gaze darkened. After all, 100 years ago, Yi Zichen had already fought against Black Dragon and the others. At the time, whether it was Black Dragon, Gu Li, the 4 zombie progenitors, or their combined Denglong, every single one of them could slay a demon king with a wave of their hand. Yi Zichen really never would have guessed that 100 years later, the demon kings had become such incredible existences. Of course, with the 3,000 demon kings, Zheng Chong can only threaten us verbally. He wouldn't dare attack us directly. In the end, he's still worried about our former allies taking revenge after ascending. It doesn't matter if he's just threatening us or actually trying to attack us. We can't let him live. Killing intent flashed through his eyes. As his expression darkened, a fierce wind howled through the maple forest. Yi Zichen absolutely wasn't the sort of person who liked to drag things out. Since they'd already reached this point, there was no need to let Xingqiang live another day. It was best to nip any threat in the bud. Yi Zichen's divine awareness had already caught sight of the Xingqiang Xueqi had spoken of, as well as the 3,000 demon kings by his side. In the blink of an eye, Yi Zichen transformed into a blur and disappeared without a trace. Pool City. After 100 years, the city lord of Pool City had been replaced by someone Yi Zichen didn't recognize. In the northern part of Pool City, Xingqiang reclined on a rattan chair and enjoyed a massage from a maid. In this huge courtyard, the 3,000 immortal kings were like a private army, meticulously guarding it. Xingqiang, right? A voice suddenly rang out. Xingqiang was napping on a recliner, enjoying a massage from a maid. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. Only then did he see a person standing in front of him. That person's body was twisted and distorted, as if projected from afar. "Who are you?" Xingqiang's expression changed. "I heard you're working for the demons right now. You want the ley line. Is that right?" asked the man. Xingqiang gulped involuntarily. When he looked at his maids, he saw that they were all staring ahead in terror. They couldn't speak, nor could they move. Chapter 1178. Leopard Embryo Tendon Strengthening Pill. Suddenly, a name appeared in Xingqiang's mind. Impossible. That person died 100 years ago. How could he appear here? Xingqiang howled madly in his heart. He simply couldn't believe that the person who had appeared here was Emperor Yi, the one who had wiped out the leader of the demons 100 years ago, the one who had used his 3 souls to seal the vicious Denglong. However, if it wasn't him, then who else could it be? In terms of strength, Xingqiang felt that he was already at the top of the top in the 3 realms. Right now, he could vaguely feel the arrival of the divine tribulation. Even with his strength, he could still feel such fear. Do they really exist in the 3 realms? No, I didn't. It's all, regardless of whether or not this person was Emperor Yi. Xingqiang couldn't stand up to him. He said with a terrified expression, but he found that he could not say a single word. 3,000 demon kings, how stingy. There were clearly supreme beings available, so why didn't they just send supreme beings to snatch the dragon vein? It seems that the fight for the Xianyuan sword is also very tense. Yi Zichen glanced at the 3,000 demon kings, who were also unable to move, then snapped his fingers. In an instant, thunder rumbled in the sky. 3,000 bolts of lightning descended from the sky at the same time, turning all 3,000 demon kings into ashes. You 2 maidservants, listen up. Let your gang find a new gang leader. If they want to follow in Xingqiang's footsteps, feel free to come to my leisure house. I welcome them at any time. However, if you dare to associate with the devil race again, it won't be as simple as taking away the gang leader. With that, Yi Zichen's afterimage vanished from the courtyard. Xingqiang also disappeared along with him. After Yi Zichen disappeared, the 2 terrified maids regained their ability to move. They couldn't help but yell. What happened? Not long after, 2 early-stage immortal kings ran into the courtyard. They couldn't help but frown as they looked at the scorched ground left behind by the heavenly lightning and the ashes of the demons. Where's Master? They were captured. The pale-faced maid stammered. He also said that we should find a new gang leader. If anyone else wants to follow in Lord Xingqiang's footsteps, they can go to the leisure house to find him. He will entertain them anytime. He even said, "What else is there to say?" That person also said that if anyone dared to associate with the devil race in the future, it wouldn't be as simple as just taking away the gang leader. I didn't expect Leisure House to have such an expert. The 2 celestial kings, who were second only to Xingqiang, fell silent. To be able to kidnap a peak celestial king without batting an eyelid, this kind of strength, was enough to make them feel fear. In the maple forest, Xueqi didn't leave after Yi Zichen left. He stood quietly in the forest and gazed into the distance. Just now, when he saw the rumbling thunder in Pool City, he knew that Yi Zichen had gone. Suddenly, a figure fell from the sky like a sandbag. At the same time, Yi Zichen reappeared in the forest. That's him. Xueqi nodded as he pointed at the prostrating Jing Chong. That's him. At this moment, Jing Chong finally saw the appearance of his captor. What he couldn't believe was that, just as he thought, this person was Emperor Yi. Although he hadn't been born in that era, every one of the 9 cities of the Immortal Region had statues of Emperor Yi. It was impossible for him not to know. In the private school here, Emperor Yi was a legendary figure. So long as one attended school, who wouldn't know who he was? Emperor Yi, please spare this junior's life. Jing Chong knelt and kowtowed repeatedly. Immortal kings had their own pride, and Jing Chong was no different. However, he was now facing a former legend, a legend who'd created a new territory for the 3 realms. Besides, he knew full well that colluding with the demons was a crime. Let me ask you, how did you get involved with the demons? Asked Yi Zichen. A few days ago, this junior encountered them while out adventuring. In order to protect myself, I had no other choice. Jing Chong couldn't continue. In order to protect himself, he had no other choice. That sounded rather pitiful. If that really was the case, then even if he'd obtained the 3,000 demon kings, he shouldn't have worked for the demons. You can't continue, can you? Yi Zichen smiled calmly, then asked, where did you meet them? How many of them were there? In the wastelands. 10 of them, 6 men and 4 women. Yi Zichen nodded. These 10 were most likely the supremes the demons had sent to fight over the Xianyuan sword. However, he couldn't be sure if they were Sky Supremes or Earth Supremes, or perhaps Diviners. If there were Diviners, things would be troublesome. Although he'd reached the peak of the 5 elements, the 2nd floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda had yet to open. Without the help of a 9th stage Sky Supreme, it would be difficult for him to compete with the gods, Yao, and demons of the 3 realms. He didn't have what it took. More importantly, he couldn't be sure that there were 9th stage Sky Supremes on the 2nd floor. Yi Zichen furrowed his brows for a while. Jing Chong was still kowtowing. Yi Zichen asked, "O.L. Shui, how do you think we should deal with him? Jing Chong can be considered a peak expert on our side. If we let him die just like that, it'll be a loss for the 3 realms. It just so happens that the Leisure House is a bit weak in terms of peak expert. Emperor Yi, do you have any treasures we can use to control him?" As soon as Xueqi finished speaking, Yi Zichen knew what he was thinking. He wanted to enslave Jing Chong and use him as a hired thug for the Leisure House. Yi Zichen agreed. Killing Jing Chong would be as easy as lifting a blade, but this Weimian was a bit too cruel. It was letting him off too lightly. However, he really had no way of controlling him. Inexplicably, he thought back to the story of the deer and the cauldron he'd read in the modern realm. "I do, of course I do." He flipped his hand and took out a bottle of pills. The pill was dark green in color, and it looked a little like a poison. "Feed this to him." Xueqi grabbed Jing Chong's chin and tossed the pill in. After swallowing the pill, Jing Chong's face contorted into an expression of extreme discomfort. When he saw this, Yi Zichen froze despite himself. In truth, that pill was nothing more than an ordinary spirit recovery pill. It seemed Jing Chong was just being paranoid. But that was even better. This is a leopard embryo tendon-changing pill. You have to take the antidote every year. If you don't, you know what will happen. I'll give the antidote to Xueqi. From now on, you'd best obediently work for the Leisure House. Otherwise, don't even think about getting the antidote. Yi Zichen crossed his arms and drooped his eyelids. He took out 2 bottles of ordinary pills and tossed them to Xueqi. Although Jing Chong was unwilling, he'd already taken the poison pill. Just now, he'd felt a strange sensation in his body. He had no choice but to grit his teeth and agree. Chapter 1179. Wilderness people in fear weren't particularly meticulous in their thinking. Even though Jing Chong had only taken an ordinary spirit recovery pill, he still firmly believed Yi Zichen's claim that it was a leopard embryo tension-changing pill. Although he'd never heard of a poison like the leopard embryo tension-changing pill, given Emperor Ye's methods, he didn't think it was fake. After taking the poison pill, Yi Zichen had Jing Chong wait to the side. In the maple forest, after chatting with Xueqi for a bit, Xueqi expressed his intention to leave. "You've only just returned, why are you leaving? Aren't you going to see Stone and the others?" "Time is a little tight." Yi Zichen chuckled, then furrowed his brows. "Do you know why Jing Chong has thousands of Demon King-level subordinates?" Jing Chong, who was waiting in the distance, sensed the gazes directed at him. He did not dare to be negligent and smiled apologetically. Xueqi frowned as he looked at him, his eyes darting around a few times. "Isn't it the demon race that covets the dragon vein?" When he heard this, Yi Zichen nodded, then shook his head. This confused Xueqi, who looked at him in confusion. The demon race naturally covets the dragon vein. Otherwise, they wouldn't have asked Jing Chong to find you and have you hand over the dragon vein. But this is only one of them, not the main point. The dragon vein was already considered the most precious treasure in the upper realm, but even it wasn't the main focus of the demon race's trip. Xueqi couldn't figure out why they were here. "They're here for the Xianyuan sword," Yi Zichen said. "Xianyuan sword!" exclaimed Xueqi. His shock was mostly due to Yi Zichen's reaction. He knew very well that the Xianyuan sword's spirit and soul Perliyuan had each sealed one of Denglong's souls. Even if the Xianyuan sword was an incredible divine artifact, a divine artifact that had lost its sword spirit was only made of relatively more precious materials. In terms of effectiveness, it was inferior to a semi-divine artifact. Xueqi couldn't understand why the demons would make such a big fuss over a divine artifact without a sword spirit. The only possibility was, could it be that the sword spirit that sealed Denglong? Xueqi hesitated. "Just as you thought, the sword spirit of the Xianyuan sword has awakened." Yi Zichen nodded calmly, his gaze solemn. "It's not just the demons of the upper three realms. The Yaoan gods have sent representatives as well. The people who came are all supreme beings and above. This, immortal kings were already extraordinary existences, but now Yi Zichen was saying that the three realms they lived in had a large number of supremes visiting them? Xueqi didn't know what to say. "I came back this time for the Xianyuan sword. The Xianyuan sword has been my weapon since my first life. No matter what, I won't let anyone take it away from me. But there's no need to be in such a hurry." It had been far too long since he'd seen Yi Zichen and the others. He really wanted to catch up. "There's no way to delay. Ever since I came here, I vaguely felt that Sister Xiang was about to recover. Just now, I used my divine sense to find her position. The people from the three sides are already there. It's better for me to get into position now," explained Yi Zichen. Now that he knew Yi Zichen had important matters to attend to, Xueqi didn't insist. Xueqi cupped his hands in greeting and said, "Then I wish you success. Farewell." Yi Zichen cupped his hands, then disappeared into the maple forest. The wastelands. Although the three realms was a lower plane, it was so vast that it rivaled even the lower lands of the God Realm's divine mountains. However, more than 60% of the three realms belonged to the wasteland. Although the land was lush, it wasn't suitable for living. Most of the vicious beasts that lived there had no intelligence, but they were extremely strong. Back when Yi Zichen was a beggar, he'd spent 100 years traveling the wastelands. He'd even sensed the aura of peak immortal king-level vicious beasts in the depths. Because the wastelands weren't suitable for living and had no natural treasures, few people ventured there. The vicious beasts that lived there never left, either. The three realms and the wastelands had always lived in relative harmony. However, just half a month ago, Quite a few uninvited guests arrived in the depths of the wasteland. In front of a vast mountain range in the depths of the wilderness, there was a ray of golden light above the mountain range. This ray of light had suddenly appeared 100 years ago. After it appeared, the golden light automatically formed a barrier that enveloped the entire mountain range. The ferocious beasts within the mountain range were also repelled by the light barrier. Several groups of people stood in front of the mountain range. They were divided into 3 camps, each of which consisted of gods, Yao, and demons. At the very front of each camp was an existence with a terrifying aura. They radiated their auras, using the strength of their auras to control the territory they controlled. At the same time, they restrained the other 2 groups. Within each camp, there were a few smaller camps. They were on guard and wary of each other, but all of their gazes were fixed on the golden light that shot into the sky. The vicious beasts that had been repelled by the golden light had settled near the mountain range. However, because of these people, the vicious beasts had no choice but to give up their homes. These people's auras were simply too terrifying. Vicious beasts weren't intelligent, but that didn't mean they couldn't sense danger. On the other hand, they were even more sensitive to threat. Your Excellency. On the demon's side, a female demon expert appeared in front of Jackdaw, who was still sitting cross-legged in midair. Jackdaw, who seemed to be asleep, opened its eyes. The instant it did, 2 powerful auras swept towards it. Narrowing his eyes, he sent out a surge of demonic energy to scatter the 2 auras. After repelling the 2 auras, he licked his lips arrogantly and looked at the 2 experts from the god race and the demon race with a provocative gaze. "What's wrong?" Jackdaw asked the female demon as he taunted her. She leaned over and whispered in his ear. Jackdaw's brows furrowed slightly, but he instantly composed himself. He dismissed the female demon, then closed his eyes once more. "All 3,000 demon kings are dead," Jackdaw muttered to himself. Just now, the female demon had reported to him that Yi Zichen had used heavenly lightning to instantly obliterate all 3,000 demon kings. When that thunderbolt appeared, I sensed that it was an expert. I never would have guessed he'd actually attacked my subordinate. Once I bring the Xianyuan sword back to the clan, I'd like to see for myself just what kind of person killed 3,000 of my subordinate. Even though he knew someone had killed all 3,000 demon kings, the Xianyuan sword had broken through the mountains. This was the most critical moment. He had no way of withdrawing. All he could do was wait until the fight for the Xianyuan sword was over, then deal with the person who dared touch his subordinates. However, right at that moment... Rumble. Chapter 1180. The Xianyuan sword leaves the mountain rumble. The entire mountain range rumbled. Countless rocks tumbled down, and the earth shook as if an earthquake had struck. Jackdaw and the 2 Yao and God race experts simultaneously opened their eyes and looked at the mountain range. A crack had appeared in the middle of the endless mountain range that stretched for hundreds of miles. A dazzling golden light lingered in the crack, and under this golden light, a long sword broke out of the mountain. Next to the longsword was a naked woman. Her eyes were shut, and her body was curled up like a baby. She hovered in the air. The Xianyuan sword. At practically the same time, the supreme experts of the demon, Yao, and God races attacked. However, in comparison, the tiger-striped middle-aged man on the demon clan's side was slightly faster. As he headed for the mountain range, he slapped his palms outwards, unleashing 2 gusts of wind. These 2 gusts of wind clearly hindered Jackdaw's and the sword-bearing man's movements. Although it was only for a moment, it was enough for the Yao to widen the distance between them and reach the mountain range with a clear advantage. Damn it! When they saw his movements, Jackdaw and the sword-bearing man inwardly cursed. However, their hands didn't remain idle. They formed hand seals and unleashed several spiritual arts. Old Crow, Oelchen, the Inhu Saint, will gladly accept the Xianyuan sword. The tiger-striped man at the front laughed heartily. When he was 100 meters away from the mountain range, he let out a fierce roar and stretched out his right hand. It transformed into a tiger's arm, and a tiger's claw slammed into the Xianyuan sword and the sword's spirit, threatening to shatter the entire mountain range. This palm strike could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. As it pressed down, the air pressure beneath it increased by 100-fold. Under the pressure of this palm, the ground showed signs of sinking. "Get over here! Don't even think about it!" Jackdaw and the sword-bearing man tried to stop him, but the giant hand descended too quickly. Before they could complete their hand seals, the tiger-striped man's hand slammed into the Xianyuan sword. Boom! The palm collided with the mountain range, and a deafening sound immediately rang out between heaven and earth. The tiger-striped middle-aged man's eyes were filled with excitement, but it didn't take long for his expression to change. The mountain range's light shield suddenly flashed with a dazzling radiance, directly shattering his Dermic Seal giant hand. At the same time that the Dermic Seal giant hand was shattered, the skin on his right arm was lacerated, and the bones were crushed. Humph! A muffled groan came from his nostrils. The tiger-striped middle-aged man hugged his arms and took a few steps back in shock. The Yao Supremes all hurried over. Jackdaw and the sword-bearing man smiled in relief, then stopped. "Tsk, tsk, tsk. The demon race really doesn't disappoint me. Their brains are never enough. It's no wonder that demons can only be beasts and can't become humans or devils." When he saw the tiger-striped middle-aged man injured, Jackdaw added insult to injury. "Sage Yin-Hu, you've really tarnished the reputation of your sages." The surrounding Yao's eyes blazed with fury. The tiger-striped middle-aged man's expression darkened, but he didn't retort. Instead, he silently sat down, took out a stalk of grass, and tossed it into his mouth. As soon as the medicinal pill entered his mouth, a ball of light appeared around him. Under the illumination, his right arm visibly healed. It was obvious that this spirit herb was no ordinary one. "Tsk, tsk, tsk, is this how the Yao live these days? You can't even refine good divine grass into pills, yet you eat it. What a waste!" When he saw the herb, Jackdaw seemed a little envious. He cursed resentfully. "Envious, right?" The tiger-striped middle-aged man snorted and rose to his feet. By now, his arm was completely healed. He glanced coldly at Jackdaw and said disdainfully, "We Yao might not have much else, but we do have a lot of natural treasures. So what if we eat divine grass as we please? Do you think everyone's like you demons? You can't even grow a single blade of grass, so you have to buy materials from us and humans? You want to eat pills too, but how many of you Yao can refine divine pills? So what if you have more divine grass? In the end, you'll still have to buy pills from us and humans. I don't know what you're so smug about," cursed Jackdaw. The tiger-striped middle-aged man's expression was unsightly. Yao territory was truly rich in resources. Divine grass and immortal grass could be found everywhere. However, it was just as Jackdaw said. Yao's talent for refining pills was far inferior to that of humans and demons. In the entire Yao realm, the number of people who could refine divine-grade pills could be counted on two hands. As the Yao and demons cursed at each other, the sword-wielding man felt a little embarrassed. Both sides had brought up the human race. For some reason, he felt like he'd been implicated. "Jackdaw, Yin-Hu, both of you, stop talking." The sword-wielding man stepped forward to act as a peacemaker. "The demon's territory is just like that. It's not suitable for medicinal plants to grow, so you can't blame them. Yao aren't good at refining pills, and tens of thousands of years ago, the Five Elements' great emperor captured practically all of their pill, artifact, and talisman masters. That's why they've suffered such heavy losses. We all have our own difficulties, so let's talk a little less. Besides, we didn't come here to argue, did we? Chen Jianan, shut your mouth. Just looking at you humans annoys me," snorted Jackdaw. Chen Jianan. He never would have guessed that the tiger-striped man would actually reach an agreement with him. He didn't give the sword-wielding man any face. When it came to refining pills, humans were the best. The strongest alchemists belonged to them. When it came to immortal and divine medicines, humans didn't have any fewer resources than Yao. On average, humans cultivated faster than demons and Yao. After becoming an immortal king, they could transcend divine tribulation and ascend to godhood. Their strength would immediately skyrocket. Humans were doted on by all. Who wouldn't be angry at them? Chen Jianan looked like a good-tempered man. Despite Yin Hu and Jackdaw's treatment, he could still laugh. Fine, fine, fine. I'll apologize on behalf of the humans. Can you please calm down? Chen Jianan smiled warmly, but then his gaze darkened. He looked at the Xianyuan sword and the curled-up sword spirit. He frowned. That Xianyuan sword isn't easy to take. Ask Yin Hu if it's easy. Didn't he just suffer a loss? Tell us how it feels, said Jackdaw. Why should I tell you? Although that was what Yin Hu said, he still narrowed his eyes and said, Just now, I fused an arm of my sovereign celestial body into that palm strike, and used all the power of a level 9 Sky Supreme. However, when I slapped down, a strange power appeared in the barrier protecting the Xianyuan sword and sword spirit, and it directly shattered the celestial body's arm. Are you saying that we have to wait for them to fuse? Chen Jianan furrowed his brows. Chapter 1181. Jackdaw's conjecture. Atop the mountain range, the Xianyuan sword and its sword spirit shone with dazzling golden light. However, compared to when it destroyed Yin Hu's Dharma body, it was a little more restrained. The golden light swirled around the sword and its spirit. As Yin Hu and Chen Jianan looked at them, they used their divine senses to lock onto each other, afraid that the other would seize the initiative. Jackdaw's point of view made Chen Jianan knit his brows. He was rather interested in Jackdaw's strange point of view. Brother Jackdaw, why would you think that? Don't listen to his nonsense, snorted Yin Hu, his expression dark and sullen. It seemed he was still angry that Jackdaw had slandered the Yao race. In the demon race, there are too many people like you who don't think before doing anything. That's why people think that you demon race are barbaric and unintelligent. Jackdaw's words had reached a certain level of sharpness. Just a second ago, Yin Hu had slandered him, but a second later, Jackdaw's words hit the nail on the head and rebuked him. As soon as these words came out, most of the people in the demon race revealed looks of terror. They'd come with Yin Hu, and now, Yin Hu's reputation had risen. All the demons present knew his character very well. Even those of the human clan who were familiar with him changed their expressions. They were worried that he would act on impulse before the Xianyuan sword was fully unsheathed. Everyone here knew full well that once the Xianyuan sword appeared, they'd fight over it. It wasn't just the other two sides. Even their own factions were here for different masters. In the end, they could all become enemies. Fighting was inevitable, but no one wanted to break this balance before the Xianyuan sword emerged from the mountain. Chen Jianan glared at Jackdaw, a little annoyed at his blabbermouth. Then, he walked over to Yin Hu, hoping he'd calm down a little. To everyone's surprise, after Yin Hu's expression changed dramatically, he unclenched his fists and snorted with a fake smile. Then why don't you tell me who the sword is waiting for? Are you going to tell me it's already chosen a master? In that case, why don't we try it out separately? Let's see who's the one who can take it out first. Chen Jianan couldn't help but look at Yin Hu in a new light when he gave up. He was famous among the Yao race for his fiery temper. It seemed that after so many years, not only had his strength improved by leaps and bounds, his shrewdness had also improved greatly. Before coming here, Chen Jianan only viewed Jackdaw as an opponent. Yin Hu's actions forced him to take him seriously. He actually endured it. Jackdaw was a little surprised by Yin Hu's reaction. He'd said all that on purpose. He really couldn't tolerate this kind of peace right now. If he took the initiative to stir up trouble, he would inevitably become the target of gossip when he returned. He had wanted to use Yin Hu's rage to break the boring balance in the arena. Unexpectedly, Yin Hu managed to restrain himself. Jackdaw inwardly cursed himself for being bored. He licked his teeth and replied somewhat arrogantly. Don't you know whether the Xian Yuan sword has chosen a master or not? Don't you know whose weapon this Xian Yuan sword belongs to? Don't tell me. This is a must, okay? You even have the gall to try it out one by one? Don't tell me the Yellow Emperor of the Xian Yuan clan reincarnated into your Yao race? Come on, drag him out and let me see just which good-for-nothing bastard is willing to be your little brother. Yin Hu's expression shifted. Just now, he'd endured Jackdaw's rebuke, and his heart was already burning with rage. Now, he was on the verge of collapse. In his fury, Yin Hu didn't understand the deeper meaning behind Jackdaw's words. All he knew was that Jackdaw was indirectly cursing him. Chen Jianan, on the other hand, understood. He couldn't help but knit his brows. Brother Jackdaw, are you saying that the Xian Yuan sword is waiting for the Yellow Emperor's reincarnation? But if my information is correct, Yi Zichen, the 9th reincarnation of the Xian Yuan clan's Yellow Emperor, fought the vicious Denglong 100 years ago. He used his divine artifacts, the Xian Yuan sword, Soul Pearl Yuan, and his own soul to seal it. Right now, a part of Denglong's soul is suppressed beneath this mountain range. If he can reincarnate 9 times, can't he reincarnate 10 times? Jackdaw's words left both Chen Jianan and Yin Hu speechless. You might say that without a soul, there's no way to reincarnate. But when it comes to understanding souls, you humans and Yao dare say you understand them better than us demons. Chen Jianan and the others were stunned speechless by the Jackdaw's words. They stared at the antennae on the Jackdaw's head. The antennae on the Jackdaw's head swayed back and forth. Although Yin Hu's brain isn't very good in terms of strength, he's no weaker than you or me. In fact, he's a bit stronger. You and I both know this. Chen Jianan nodded. Even though Yin Hu was about to explode in anger at Jackdaw's praise, after hearing Jackdaw's flattery, he calmed down and rubbed his nose proudly. If even he can't break the barrier, then we naturally can't either. No one here can break it. We're all 9th stage Sky Supremes. If we can't break it, do you think a diviner will come down? If a diviner really could break it, the higher-ups wouldn't have sent us here, would they? What's more, the Xian Yuan sword naturally has its reasons for being the #1 divine artifact of the ancient times. Even the Eastern Emperor Bell waits for the Eastern Emperor, so why can't the Xian Yuan sword wait for its master, the Yellow Emperor? Even if Yin Hu's brain wasn't very good, he understood what Jackdaw was trying to say. Chen Jianan understood even better. What Jackdaw was trying to say was that even a diviner wouldn't be able to break the barrier. All they could do was wait. Perhaps the Xian Yuan sword's master would appear and they'd fight over it. For now, let's just sit here and wait. Once the master of the Xian Yuan sword appears, we'll be able to get to work. Jackdaw shrugged, then narrowed his eyes. Of course, if you want to make a move ahead of time and reduce each other's strength, I'll raise both hands in approval. When they saw his excited expression, Chen Jianan and Yin Hu curled their lips in speechlessness. Jackdaw was a madman. Others might pay attention to their own safety in a fight, but he was willing to throw his life away and enjoy the thrill of battle. Even Yin Hu, who Jackdaw said was stronger than him and Chen Jianan, rubbed his nose resentfully. He didn't even look Jackdaw in the eye. How boring! Jackdaw, who'd been itching for a fight, was snubbed by Chen Jianan and the others. Bored, he sighed and returned to the demon's territory. When Chen Jianan and Yin Hu saw him leave, they sighed with relief. Their gazes fell on the mountain range, fixed on the #1 divine artifact on the rankings. Chapter 1182. Chapter 1182. Xian Yuan Xiang's awakening. The sun and moon alternated. It was a full moon, and its moonlight bathed the earth in a silvery sheen. Atop the mountain range, the Xian Yuan sword and its sword spirit glowed with golden light like a miniature sun, eternally radiating golden light. Off in the distance, Chen Jianan, Yin Hu, and Jackdaw landed in their respective camps, ready for battle. They'd been here for several days now, and didn't dare relax in the slightest. Even Earth and Sky Supremes like them were starting to feel tired after such a long period of tension. However, before the Xianyuan sword and the other two races, they couldn't let down their guard. Buzz! At this moment, a golden wave suddenly rippled outward from the Xianyuan sword above the mountain range. In the blink of an eye, all three factions unleashed their divine power. They were on high alert as they looked at the mountain range. The golden wave from before was only the beginning. After that golden wave, there were still several more golden waves being released. At the same time, the mountain range, which stretched for hundreds of kilometers, began to show signs of collapsing. Bottomless ravines appeared on the ground where the three factions stood, causing the entire land to split apart. Furthermore, the cracks continued to spread into the distance. Even the immortal region, millions of kilometers away, sensed the tremors. Even the 9 cities outside the immortal region felt them. The beast region was filled with the cries of birds and the roars of beasts. Countless major powers emerged from seclusion, either to perform divination or to observe the stars. In short, they did everything they could to figure out the cause of the tremors. Are they coming out? Chen Jianan gripped his sword so tightly his palms began to sweat. His divine sense locked onto the entire wastelands. If everything was as Jackdaw had predicted, the Yellow Emperor's reincarnation was probably already in the wilderness. Yin Hu's eyes grew solemn as well. His gaze flickered between the Xianyuan sword, Chen Jianan, and Jackdaw. The Xianyuan sword's sudden movements plunged everyone into a state of intense anxiety. Only Jackdaw remained excited. Finally, I can fight around. Among them, there was one person with a strange expression. He was one of the demons, the one who'd spoken up to stop Jackdaw from attacking the immortal region, Cain. At this time, his eyes were not locked on the Xianyuan sword, nor were they on the human clan or the demon clan. With a deep frown, he had been looking at the periphery of the three forces. Could it be that he has come? His gaze changed as he looked around, but at this moment, a cry of surprise pulled his gaze back to the mountain range. She opened her eyes. The expert of the demon race pointed at the sword spirit Xianyuan Xiang in the mountain range. As she spoke, Xianyuan Xiang, who was curled up like a baby, stretched out her curled-up body. Her smooth body was surrounded by a holy radiance, completely covering her private parts. At the same time, her eyes opened. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders like a waterfall. Barefoot, she tapped the air lightly with her jade-like feet and grabbed the hilt of the Xianyuan sword with her right hand. She pulled the sword out of the mountains that were deeply embedded in them. What a goddess! When the humans, Yao, and demons saw Xianyuan Xiang, quite a few of them looked infatuated and muttered to themselves. Compared to Xianyuan Xiang, the women who'd come with them paled in comparison, like fluorescent lights in front of the bright moon. Xianyuan Xiang, the sword spirit of the Xianyuan sword, took a few steps forward. Every step she took left a ripple in the air. When she reached the edge of the mountain range's barrier, she stopped. From her eyes, one could clearly see that she was at a loss at this moment. Her gaze was constantly changing, as if she was looking for someone. It really is as Jackdaw said. When he saw this, Chen Jianan furrowed his brows. His divine sense had already enveloped the entire wasteland. Even the slightest disturbance would alert him immediately. It wasn't just him. Yin Hu was the same. The key to obtaining the Xianyuan sword was likely the Yellow Emperor's reincarnation. Xianyuan Xiang stood dazedly at the edge of the barrier and gazed off into the distance. Disappointment gradually filled her eyes. When they saw her frown, quite a few of the men present felt their hearts ache. They didn't want to see their goddess like that. Could it be that the Yellow Emperor's reincarnation hasn't arrived? Chen Jianan muttered to himself. In an instant, he saw the dazed Xianyuan Xiang's eyes light up with radiant joy. Both Chen Jianan and Yin Hu trembled. Atop the mountain range, Xianyuan Xiang smiled brilliantly, her face wreathed in joy. It didn't take long for her to merge into the Xianyuan sword, as if she couldn't wait any longer. The moment she entered the sword, the simple and unadorned Xianyuan sword shone with a golden light. Golden light soared into the sky, shattering the light barrier protecting them. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The instant the barrier shattered, 3 blurs streaked across the sky. Chen Jianan was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. The divine sword in his hand glowed with dazzling light, and as he sped through the air, it continuously fired beams of sword light. The light sliced through the air, landing directly in front of Jackdaw and Yin Hu. Jackdaw grinned and used his physical body to take the blow. Purple blood flowed from his chest, making him even more excited. That's right. That's the way. A crazed look flashed through his eyes. Jackdaw grinned and stomped fiercely through the air. With each step, the void shattered, revealing pitch-black primordial chaos. On the other side, Yin Hu's eyes flashed. He clenched his claws, shattering the sword light. Then, he stopped, gathered his energy in his dantian, and opened his mouth wide. Roar! The sound wave attack was accompanied by the roar of a dragon and the roar of a tiger. It shattered the space in front of the 3 of them. The space collapsed, revealing pitch-black primordial chaos. Chen Jianan, who was at the very front, had no choice but to slow down and be careful. If he wasn't careful and got sucked into the primordial chaos, even a diviner would lose his way and never be able to return. Chen Jianan, Yin Hu, and Jackdaw exchanged blows. Their allies didn't just stand there either. Exquisite battle techniques, magical treasures, and talismans clashed, illuminating the moonlit night with a myriad of colors. Just as they were exchanging blows, the space around them twisted, and a black-robed youth stepped out. He glanced indifferently at the chaotic battle between the immortals, gods, and demons, then his gaze fell on the Xianyuan sword atop the mountain range. The Xianyuan sword seemed to have sensed his gaze, and its blade trembled violently. With a rumble, it transformed into a golden arc that pierced through Chen Jianan, Yin Hu, and Yin Hu. It passed through the 3 forces and landed firmly in the youth's hand. Big Sister Xiang. I knew you'd come. She put her hands on her hips in a domineering manner. When he saw her like this, the youth chuckled helplessly. He ran his fingers over the blade of the sword, his gaze cold as he looked at the others. Chapter 1183. Yi Zichen. Chapter 1183. Despicable Yi Zichen. As soon as the Xianyuan sword fell into his hands, Yi Zichen sensed at least a dozen divine senses lock onto him. Ordinary people couldn't possibly enjoy the honor of being taken seriously by so many supremes. Of course, this honor was accompanied by suffocating pressure. Do these people have a grudge against you? Asked the sword spirit, Xianyuan Xiang, after a few glances at him. I didn't have a grudge against them before, but now, I'm afraid I do, and it's no small grudge either. Yi Zichen gripped the Xianyuan sword tightly, his nerves completely taut. He might have fantasized on his way here, but now that he was here. They were all Sky Supremes, right? Earlier, he'd been smug about becoming an Earth Supreme, but now… Could he just laugh? Can you beat them? Xianyuan Xiang felt like she'd lost her mind. She could sense Yi Zichen's tension. If he could beat them, how could he possibly be like this? How about we run? That's what I was thinking. With that, Yi Zichen put the Xianyuan sword back on his back, then smiled at the 3 factions of demons, Yao, and gods. You've all worked hard. His initiative didn't get any response from anyone. Those people were still staring at him with cold eyes. Yi Zichen's heart trembled involuntarily. He scratched his head, then laughed. I see you're all tired, so I won't waste any more time with you. How about this? I'll treat you to a drink sometime. Goodbye. Yi Zichen cupped his fists, smiled, and retreated. However, he saw that although they didn't say anything to him, they'd completely sealed off his path of retreat. Could be said that there was no door to heaven and no door to hell. You can leave, but leave the Xianyuan sword behind. The godly sword in Chen Jiannan's hand flashed with a sharp, cold light. Under the moonlight, it shimmered coldly. You're going a little too far. The Xianyuan sword was mine to begin with. I'm just here to take back the weapon that belongs to me. Why do you have to be like this? Aren't you a bandit? Yi Zichen laughed drily, but he wasn't just laughing foolishly. While talking to Chen Jiannan, he was also vaguely sensing which side's defense was weaker. If he wanted to break through, where would he have the highest chance of success? Cut the crap. Hurry up and hand over the Xianyuan sword, Yin Hu shouted angrily. Look at you, your temper is too explosive. Wouldn't it be better if you talked to me for a while? Yi Zichen sighed helplessly. His eyes were filled with helplessness as he looked around at the three groups surrounding him. It had to be said that through his instantaneous judgment, none of these people's positions were easy to break through. These people were simply too much stronger than him. With his strength at the Earth Sovereign Realm, even if he had the Xianyuan sword, it would be impossible for him to deal with these heavenly sovereigns, especially the 3 9th-stage heavenly sovereigns who posed the greatest threat to him. Forcefully breaking through would be a bit difficult. Since this plan didn't work, Yi Zichen thought of another method. Everyone, if you really want the Xianyuan sword, then I can only give it to you for the sake of my own life. Xianyuan Xiang angrily drew the Xianyuan sword from her back and immediately yelled, You really want to give it to me? Shut up. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes and told her to shut up, then shrugged. This sword has been with me for a long time, so I'm a bit reluctant to give it to her. Yi Zichen smiled at Chen Jiannan and the others, then frowned at Xianyuan Xiang. Hey, sword spirit, why are you so stupid? I'm just a nobody. You're the #1 divine artifact of the primordial era. If you follow me, you'll only make your brilliance dim. There are so many experts here right now. If you follow them, your future will be even better. Besides, the situation is clear. I can't take you with me. If I try to take you by force, I'm afraid I'll die. I care about my life. It's not worth it to throw it away for you. Yi Zichen shook his head at Xianyuan Xiang, as if afraid of death. His expression made it seem as if he really wanted to abandon her. Yi Zichen, what do you take me for? Roared Xianyuan Xiang. A weapon, of course. What else could it be? Said Yi Zichen disdainfully. You. When she heard Yi Zichen say that, Xianyuan Xiang felt as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her eyes glazed over and she laughed foolishly. A weapon. She never would have guessed that in his eyes, she was nothing more than a weapon. Xianyuan Xiang had followed Yi Zichen ever since the dragons forged her. From the first life of the Yellow Emperor to the current Yi Zichen, she'd never left his side. She'd never served two masters. The moment she laid eyes on the Yellow Emperor, she'd decided that from now on, he was her only master. 100 years ago, he'd fused his godhead with her. In a moment of life and death, he'd asked her to use her spirit to protect one of his 3 souls. She'd agreed without hesitation. At the time, she'd just fused with a godhead. A weapon fused with a godhead? It had never appeared before in all of history. Even the God Emperor of the God race would take it seriously. So long as she wanted to, she could climb up the tree and become a phoenix. But she didn't. In her heart, Yi Zichen was her only master. His words were like a prophecy. 100 years later, the first person she sought out after awakening was Yi Zichen. But now, Yi Zichen was going to hand her over to these people of unknown origins for the sake of his own life. You. Xianyuan Xiang couldn't speak. She took physical form and pointed at Yi Zichen, her eyes filled with disappointment. Big Sister Xiang, please help me one more time. Despite her desolate expression, Yi Zichen didn't blame himself in the slightest. Instead, he shamelessly begged her. This behavior infuriated quite a few of the people surrounding Yi Zichen. Quite a few of them inwardly cursed Yi Zichen for being such a scum. Xianyuan Xiang was utterly disappointed in Yi Zichen. When he said those words, she was utterly disappointed. All right, no problem. With a carefree smile, Xianyuan Xiang merged back into the Xianyuan sword. When Yi Zichen saw this, he grinned. Everyone, look, I've already convinced her. I'll leave the sword with you now. Can I? Can I leave now? Sure. Although Chen Jianan and the others despised Yi Zichen's behavior, their mission was to obtain the Xianyuan sword. They couldn't be bothered to care about Yi Zichen's character. Xianyuan Xiang, who'd fused with the Xianyuan sword, struggled with all her might to escape Yi Zichen's grasp, but to her surprise, Yi Zichen tightened his grip on her, still grinning like a villain. Chapter 1184. A trap. The Xianyuan sword's fate was obviously a very important issue. Whether it was humans, Yao, or demons, they all valued the Xianyuan sword's ownership. Everyone wanted to bring it back to their leaders and claim credit for it. Now that the sword was in Yi Zichen's hands, no matter which side he gave it to, the other two wouldn't agree. Yin Hu and Chen Jianan looked at each other. They both sensed clear hostility in each other's eyes. Previously, the three sides had surrounded Yi Zichen harmoniously, but now, in response to his question, they were all wary of each other. Forget it. I'm a human, after all. How about I give the sword to a human expert? Sensing the change in the atmosphere, Yi Zichen said helplessly. No way. Yin Hu and the people from the demon clan immediately spoke up to stop them. Whoever had the sword in their hands would have the absolute initiative. If Yi Zichen really gave the sword to Chen Jianan, wouldn't that be terrible? This. Can't I? Yi Zichen shrank back in fear. He looked around cautiously, gripped the Xianyuan sword, and didn't seem to know what to do. Why not, kid? So long as you give me the sword, I can guarantee that you'll leave this place unscathed. A rough-looking man immediately stepped forward. He was tall and burly, and standing in the crowd, he was clearly several times larger than the others. As he spoke, he slapped his chest so hard that it made thumping sounds. Little brother, how about you give the sword to your big sister? I can guarantee that you'll leave this place unscathed. How about it? Not only can I help you leave, but I can also agree to a small request of yours. So long as it's not too outrageous, I can agree to anything. As soon as the brawny man spoke, a fox-like woman stepped out of the crowd. She swayed her slender waist, looked at Yi Zichen with seductive eyes and seductive fingers, and lured him to hand the Xianyuan sword to her. How laughable! You really have the gall to say that I'll leave unscathed. Another arrogant, cold laugh rang out. Kid, if you give the Xianyuan sword to anyone else, I guarantee that you won't live past tomorrow. But, if you give it to me, that's a different story. After that, several others spoke up. These people either threatened or tempted. In short, what they wanted was the ownership of the Xianyuan sword. Yi Zichen, who stood in the middle of the crowd, looked around in distress. Wherever he looked, everyone smiled kindly and made small gestures with him. Then what do you think I should do now? Yi Zichen clutched his head in distress, then looked at the surrounding people in confusion. You all want the Xianyuan sword so much, but there's only one Xianyuan sword. Who should I give it to? If I gave this one, that one said it wanted me dead. If I gave that one said it wanted me dead. I've made it very clear. I cherish my life. I want to live. Give them to me. Give them to me. Give them to me. The surrounding people shouted like crazy, but Yi Zichen still had a troubled expression on his face. That won't do. All of you are saying nice things. Who knows what will happen if I give you the sword? I only have this one life, so I have to be careful with it. How about this? You guys decide a victor, and I'll give the sword to the strongest among you. That way I can be completely certain of my safety. What do you think? Give me the Xianyuan sword and I can guarantee your safety for 100 years. I, Yin Hu, am a man of my word. At that moment, Yin Hu took a few steps forward, and the faint image of an ancient tiger, tens of thousands of feet long, appeared behind him. Here, I, Yin Hu, am publicly acknowledged as the strongest. Everyone in the Yao race knows that I, Yin Hu, am a man of my word. If I say I can guarantee your safety for 100 years, I can guarantee it. Really? Even after hearing Yin Hu's words, Yi Zichen still looked apprehensive. He glanced around Chen Jianan and Jackdaw. He couldn't be bothered to pay any attention to the small fries surrounding him. The ones Yi Zichen valued the most were Jackdaw, Yin Hu, and Chen Jianan. They were the strongest of the crowd. Yin Hu had already spoken. He was now waiting for Chen Jianan and Jackdaw's response. You've really made a clever move. Chen Jianan smiled calmly. After seeing Yi Zichen's acting just now, he'd really believed everything he'd said. But now, if he still couldn't figure out what was going on, then he'd truly lived his life for nothing. Boss, I don't understand, said Yi Zichen, feigning ignorance. I just want to guarantee my own safety. I value my life a lot, so it's no problem for me to think things through. Chen Jianan pressed his lips into a smile and said, Forget it. I can't be bothered to argue with you. That way, you won't have to worry about who to give the Xianyuan sword to. Just put the sword on the ground. In the end, we'll decide who it belongs to. It has nothing to do with you, so don't worry. Then my safety. I, Chen Jianan, promise you that you can absolutely leave this place unscathed. You won't be in any danger. The people surrounding you won't dare attack you either. Brother Jackdaw, Brother Yin Hu, what do you think? Chen Jianan looked at Yi Zichen, then back at Jackdaw and Yin Hu. That's fine. Yin Hu nodded. So long as the Xianyuan sword didn't end up in Jackdaw or Chen Jianan's hands, he could accept a fair fight. Of course I have no problem with that either. Jackdaw had seen through Yi Zichen's little trick right from the start. However, he didn't point it out. No matter what the result was, they'd still have to fight. As long as he could fight, that was enough for him. After gaining Yin Hu and Jackdaw's approval, Chen Jianan smiled at Yi Zichen. All right, since Brother Yin Hu and Brother Jackdaw have no objections, then please put down the Xianyuan sword and leave. That's no fun at all. Even after Chen Jianan made his decision, Yi Zichen didn't loosen his grip on the Xianyuan sword. Instead, he hugged it to his chest and snorted with an insincere smile. He finally understood. Chen Jianan and Jackdaw had long since seen through his plan. Just now, in their eyes, he'd been nothing more than a clown jumping around. He'd wasted all his energy putting on an act. In the end, he'd gained nothing at all. Yin Hu, on the other hand, seemed to have fallen right into his trap. It seemed Yin Hu's brain wasn't working very well. What do you mean, Your Excellency? Chen Jianan pressed his lips into a smile. Chapter 1185. 5 Elements Appear. Chapter 1185. His words were like a proverb, and the wind rose with his voice. As soon as Yi Zichen finished speaking, fierce winds howled through the endless wastelands. 9 tornadoes soared into the sky, destroying heaven and earth. Wherever the winds howled, mountains crumbled and ancient trees snapped. Countless blades of wind whistled through the air like incomparably sharp blades of sword energy. When they landed in front of the surrounding Supremes, they left shallow, bloody gashes on their bodies. You've got some skill. Chen Jianan reached out with his right hand. Given his strength, those seemingly swift blades of wind were nothing to him. In truth, he'd let the blades of wind hit the back of his hand on purpose. He wanted to see just how powerful they were. The results were obvious. The blades of wind could pierce through his physical defenses. He could tell that Yi Zichen was just an early-stage Earth Supreme. For his battle techniques to be this effective was already impressive. However, this wasn't something Yi Zichen could be proud of. This was a new level of wind he'd comprehended. It was countless times stronger than the wind he'd released before. Yet in the end, he'd only managed to scratch a thin layer of skin. This was far too disappointing. And that was just against Chen Jianan. When the blades of wind landed on Jackdaw and Yin Hu, they didn't even break their skin. This is far more troublesome than I imagined. Yi Zichen frowned and sighed inwardly. Then he turned to Xianyuan Xiang and said, Big Sister Xiang, go hide in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda for a while. Didn't you say you were going to give me away? Snorted Xianyuan Xiang. Do you really think I'm that sort of person? Yi Zichen pursed his lips speechlessly. Alright, stop throwing a tantrum. Go hide in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda for a while. I'm going to play with these guys for a while. He conveniently stored the Xianyuan sword in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The supreme beings present had been paying attention to the Xianyuan sword in his hand all this time. When they saw that the Xianyuan sword had disappeared from his hand, their faces all darkened. Where did you hide the Xianyuan sword? Guess. Yi Zichen pressed his lips into a calm smile. When the others heard that, they laughed arrogantly. No matter how you hide it, it can't possibly disappear from your body. Once you've dealt with it, it'll naturally reappear. Then go ahead and try. Yi Zichen's gaze darkened, and he stomped the ground with his right foot. From the position under his feet, under the tremendous force, it immediately shattered in all directions. He raised his hands high into the air, and the 9 tornadoes returned to his side. Yi Zichen stood in the middle of the fierce winds, his robes and long hair fluttering in the wind. His eyes instantly flashed with a sharp light. Rain. In a radius of 10,000 miles, magical rain poured down in torrent. The magical rain continuously corroded the barrier that the Supremes had erected around them to defend against the wind blades. Magical rain? Chern Jianan, Yin Hu, and Jackdaw all sensed something different about the rain. This kid is quite interesting. Jackdaw reached out and caught the raindrop. As soon as they touched his hands, they turned into white mist. He's proficient in both wind and rain. It looks like he's walking on the Tao of wind and the Tao of rain. Moreover, his comprehension of the Tao is quite good. The path of mediocrity won't amount to much. Chen Jianan snorted. As they chatted, the Yaoan gods attacked Yi Zichen. Only the demons stood to the side, waiting for orders from Jackdaw. Brother Jackdaw, could it be that you're not interested in the Xianyuan sword? Chen Jianan arched his brows. Cut the crap. If I wasn't interested, why would I come here? Jackdaw's mouth was as unforgiving as ever. He said disdainfully, I just don't want to outnumber you. Even if I win, it'll be an unfair victory. He was obviously criticizing Chen Jianan and Yin Hu for relying on their numbers to bully Yi Zichen. However, Jackdaw stood on the moral high ground and attacked them. Chen Jianan and the others merely smiled calmly. In their hearts, however, they cursed Jackdaw for having a screw loose. Yi Zichen's cultivation was far below that of a Sky Supreme. He'd never even considered summoning the Yao from the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The strongest cultivator on the first floor was a 9th stage Earth Supreme, while the weakest here were Sky Supremes. Summoning them out would just be throwing their lives away, but he could use the Tao of the 5 elements to deal with them for a while. Rain, form a dragon. At his command, the magical rain in the sky really did condense into a roaring water dragon. Of course, it wasn't just rain that could condense. Wind could as well. However, right now, Yi Zichen needed the 9 tornadoes to create a fierce gale to restrict the Supreme's movements. The water dragon roared, and as soon as it opened its mouth, it sprayed arrows of magical rain onto the Supremes. The rain was on the same level as the wind blade. After condensing into water arrows, their attacks became incomparably sharp. The water arrows directly pierced through the bodies of the 3rd stage Sky Supremes and below. The condensed water dragon was quite effective, but condensing it required an enormous amount of magical rain. It wasn't enough to deal with so many Sky Supremes at all. Lightning, thunder, fire. By now, Yi Zichen couldn't hold back any longer. He released all of the great Tao of the 5 elements. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Fierce winds howled, rain poured down, lightning flashed, thunder roared, and heavenly flames burned the earth. How is this possible? Yin Hu and Chen Jianan exclaimed in unison. When they saw the Tao of the 5 elements appear around Yi Zichen, they froze. That's the Tao of the 5 elements. Chen Jianan, who'd previously looked down on Yi Zichen's Tao of the Five Elements, was so shocked he almost bit his tongue. Ever since the Five Elements' great emperor died and destroyed his Tao heart of the Five Elements, no one else has walked the path of the Tao of the Five Elements. This kid now has the Five Elements. Could it be that he wants to forge his own path through the Tao of the Five Elements and condense his Tao heart? That's not all. Look at his understanding of the Tao of the Five Elements. They complement each other. I'm afraid his understanding of the Tao of the Five Elements has already reached initial success. Yin Hu knit his brows, but despite himself, he couldn't help but admire Yi Zichen. All of them walked the path of their predecessors. With a Tao heart, they didn't need to explore their own paths. But Yi Zichen was different. He was fumbling around on his own. He'd forcefully carved out his own path, which was thousands, if not tens of thousands, of times more difficult than theirs. However, admiration was one thing. The Yao had to obtain the Xianyuan sword no matter what. Yin Hu narrowed his eyes, twisted his neck, and took a few steps forward. At the same time, his gaze landed on Chen Jianan and Jackdaw. We all know how powerful the Tao of the Five Elements is. Relying on them to steal the Xianyuan sword is no longer possible. Let's not just watch the show. Let's attack. If you want to attack, then attack. I don't like bullying the few with numbers. Jackdaw shrugged. Yin Hu didn't respond to Jackdaw's decision. Instead, he looked at Chen Jianan, who nodded. Chen Jianan swung his divine sword with all his might, slicing apart the waterfall of magical rain. Chapter 1186. Bye-bye. Under the might of the Tao of the Five Elements, not even the Sky Supreme's Yi Zichen was fighting had a good ending. They were either struck by lightning, pierced by arrows, or burned by fire. In any case, these heavenly sovereigns that were so glorious before everyone looked pitiful at this moment. Chen Jianan and Yin Hu weren't too surprised. The Tao of the Five Elements was on the same level as the Tao of eternal life and destruction. It was only natural for it to be this strong. However, the true strength of the Tao of the Five Elements lay in its infinite variations. Countless combinations could achieve countless different effects. Fortunately, Yi Zichen had only touched the basic. He hadn't yet reached the point where he could fuse the Tao of the Five Elements together. Otherwise, these Supremes would have suffered even worse fates. You can all withdraw. When Chen Jianan and Yin Hu stepped forward, they had their clansmen withdraw. Jackdaw waved at the demons as well. All of you, come to me. The demons who hadn't participated in Yi Zichen's fight fared much better than the humans and Yao. They had no intention of taking his life, and all they'd done was defend themselves against the shockwaves of his attacks. As a result, none of them had sustained any injuries. Your Excellency, the humans and Yao have already taken action. Are we just going to keep waiting? Said one of the demons. Jackdaw smiled indifferently when he heard that. If they want to fight, let them. I absolutely won't bully them with numbers. You should thank me. If I'd told you to attack just now, you wouldn't have fared any better than the humans and Yao. You might even have suffered worse injuries. But the 3,000 devil kings of our devil race might have been killed by him. So what if he killed them? It's just 3,000 demon kings. He hasn't even become a supreme yet, so what's there to worry about? Jackdaw snorted coldly. Just sit tight and watch. If the Xianyuan sword falls into the humans or Yao's hands, we'll snatch it back. If the two of them can't beat that brat, I'll give him enough time to recover, then fight him one-on-one. The Tao of the Five Elements. I've never fought someone like him before. Under Chen Jianan and Yin Hu's orders, the human and demon experts retreated. Yi Zichen was just an Earth Supreme. In their eyes, he was nothing more than a plaything they could squash as they pleased. Never would they have guessed this plaything would give them such a pleasant surprise. Dragging their injured bodies to the side, their gazes landed on Chen Jianan and the others. I thought you two would be able to endure for a long time. When Yi Zichen saw Chen Jianan and Yi Zichen arrive, He looked at them coldly. These two were the final big boss. There was still a big boss of the devil race that hadn't appeared yet. Yi Zichen glanced discreetly at Jackdaw and realized that it had no intention of attacking. Just now, when the human clan and the demon clan besieged him, the devil clan did not attack him. They want to be the fisherman who benefits from the fight between the sandpiper and the clam? Yi Zichen frowned. When Chen Jianan was 50 meters away from Yi Zichen, he stopped. His blade crackled with lightning. Yi Zichen followed the blade's edge and saw the character, Shao, engraved on its hilt. You're from the Shao family? Yi Zichen frowned. So you know the Lightning Emperor's Shao family? Chen Jianan snorted arrogantly. That's right. I'm a member of the Lightning Emperor's Shao family. Shao, who is my master, and I'm his chief disciple. I never would have guessed the Shao family had an outsider too. This world really was small. Before descending to the lower realms, Yi Zichen had run into Shao Hu and killed 2 of his disciples right in front of him. To think he'd run into someone from the Shao family again. And this guy was also Shao Hu's disciple? Why can't I? Chen Jianan smiled coldly, and the lightning around his blade grew even more blinding. I have to admit, you've given us quite a pleasant surprise. At first, I thought you were only skilled in a few of the 5 elements. I never would have guessed you were proficient in all 5. The Tao of the 5 elements posed no small threat to our people. Given your strength as an Earth Supreme, you managed to injure so many Sky Supremes. You should be proud of yourself. However, that's as far as you go. Tell us your name. Given that you chose the Tao of the 5 elements, you're worthy of us knowing your name, said Yin Hu. If I tell you my name, I'm afraid some of you will explode. Yi Zichen grinned arrogantly and touched his lips. My name is Yi Zichen. In the lower realms, everyone calls me Grandmaster Yi. As soon as he said that, Yi Zichen looked at Chen Jianan playfully. As expected, as soon as he said the words, Grandmaster Yi, Chen Jianan's expression changed dramatically. So it's you. However, Chen Jianan quickly composed himself and swung his sword. Then I'll be taking revenge for my junior apprentice brother. Yin Hu never would have guessed that the instant Chen Jianan spoke, he'd already swung his sword at Yi Zichen. However, the sword's position wasn't particularly tricky. Yi Zichen, who'd been tense all this time, easily dodged. You want to take revenge for your junior apprentice brother with just that? Your master, Shao Hu, was there, but he couldn't save your junior apprentice brother either. You. Stop dreaming. Someone from the Northern Divine Mountain intervened, so my master couldn't do anything. Now, there's no one from the Northern Divine Mountain present. Your only fate is death. Are you sure? Yi Zichen smiled, then stretched lazily as if he didn't care at all. How about this? Let's make a bet. If you can't kill me, you'll be my dog. How about that? You have a sharp tongue. After learning that Yi Zichen was Grandmaster Yi, Chen Jianan's fury reached an uncontrollable peak. He'd been especially close to Xiao Zhan. When he'd first heard of Xiao Zhan's death, his first thought had been revenge, but his master had sent him here to fight for the Xianyuan sword. Now that he'd run into the man in question, he was determined to kill him. The lightning on his sword soared into the heavens. Surprisingly, it connected to the heavens and interfered with Yi Zichen's Tao of the 5 elements. It was as if the tip of his sword was connected to the heavens' lightning as a conductor. A thunderstorm gathered power, ready to explode. Tch, this looks much fiercer than my lightning, Yi Zichen muttered to himself. He clearly cultivated the Tao of the 5 elements, and his lightning should be the purest of all. However, Chen Jianan's lightning was far purer than his. Obviously, there were still many details he hadn't grasped yet. Explode. At the same time, Chen Jianan roared angrily, and the thunderstorm in the heavens exploded. Yi Zichen couldn't help but feel his scalp go numb when he saw the lightning explode in the sky. He scratched his head and chuckled. Chapter 1187. They'd been discovered. Yi Zichen's words were like a cool breeze blowing into Chen Jian and the others' ears. Then, they discovered that Yi Zichen had disappeared from their line of sight, just like the Xianyuan sword. They couldn't find any trace of him. How did he disappear? All the Sky Supremes spread their divine senses outwards. Their divine senses wove together to form a seamless net. Wind, sand, water. Their divine senses disintegrated all the elements in the world, but they couldn't find Yi Zichen's location. Chen Jianan's face was ashen. Yi Zichen's mocking gaze pierced his heart like a thorn. He'd let him escape? He was a majestic 9th stage Sky Supreme, only a step away from becoming a diviner. Yet he'd let an ant who'd just become an Earth Supreme escape? This was absolutely the greatest humiliation he'd ever suffered, a stain on his life that he'd never be able to erase. Impossible! Chen Jianan roared inwardly. While fighting Yi Zichen, he'd already sealed off the surrounding space. Yi Zichen couldn't have just disappeared for no reason. He was absolutely still here. Buzz. In the blink of an eye, his divine sense had already enveloped the entire wildlands. Even if he had to dig 3 feet underground, he'd find Yi Zichen. This is too frightening. Yi Zichen stood on the first floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda and patted his chest in trepidation. Although the Tao of the 5 elements was a peerless great Tao, it was still no match for a 9th stage Sky Supreme like Chen Jianan. The difference in cultivation was simply too vast. He really wasn't in the wastelands yet. In fact, he was still where he'd disappeared. He'd simply used the Yao Ceiling Pagoda's transformation to transform into an unremarkable speck of dust to escape the Sky Supreme's pursuit and force them to retreat. Master! The instant Yi Zichen appeared, Meng Huairong and Jiao Qi walked up to him. Xianyuan Xiang followed them. This was her first time inside the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, and she was filled with curiosity. She could sense that this was clearly just a spatial divine artifact, yet people could live here, and the laws of heaven and earth were the same as the outside world. She hadn't expected that after 100 years, Yi Zichen would be so lucky. Sister Xiang, please don't mind what I said at that time. Yi Zichen smiled apologetically towards Xianyuan Xiang. He knew that his words were rather hurtful. Forget it. I won't lower myself to your level. I'm a great man and won't hold it against you. Xianyuan Xiang pretended to be angry and wrinkled her nose. What's the situation outside? Yi Zichen didn't explain. He simply waved his right hand, and a screen appeared in front of him. The screen displayed the situation outside the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The situation doesn't look too good, Xianyuan Xiang said. Of course. Those heavenly sovereigns are all here for you. If they can't get their hands on you, will they just give up? Asked Yi Zichen. As expected, it's hard to abandon my natural beauty. So many people want me. Xianyuan Xiang put on a particularly narcissistic pose, stroking her hair coquettishly. Yi Zichen was truly speechless. He ignored her and stared intently at the Yao Ceiling Pagoda's curtains. Hurry up and go. You can't even find me, so what's the point of wasting time? In his heart, he prayed incessantly. Given the current situation, the only way out was to wait for the heavenly supremes to retreat. TCH, Brother Chen, this won't do. You let an Earth Supreme escape right under your nose? Jackdaw chuckled. When Yi Zichen disappeared, he'd been astonished as well. He'd searched the area with his divine awareness, but to no avail. Don't just watch the show. If he's gone, you demons won't get the Xianyuan sword either, snorted Chen Jianan. Then we won't get it. The Xianyuan sword isn't particularly useful to us demons anyway, sneered Jackdaw. When Chen Jianan heard that, he froze inexplicably. The demons really did want the Xianyuan sword, but it wasn't necessary. Compared to the Yaoan gods, the Xianyuan sword wasn't a high priority. If I can't get the Xianyuan sword, don't even think about getting the Qiyu sword, countered Chen Jianan. Then let's see. My hands just happen to be itchy. How about we give it a try right here? Before he'd even finished speaking, Jackdaw's Sky Supreme aura burst forth. The monstrous demonic aura made the Supremes of the God race and the Demon race feel somewhat uncomfortable. Chen Jianan was also somewhat embarrassed by the other party's attitude of attacking at the slightest disagreement. Attacking was definitely irrational. How could he have said something like that just now? Now, he was in a difficult position to get off. What's there to try? The Xianyuan sword hasn't even fallen into our hands yet. Alright, enough talk. I'm sure the Xianyuan sword and its wielder are still nearby. Let's focus on finding them. Yin stepped forward to smooth things over. Chen Jianan took the opportunity to snort and ignore Jackdaw. Found it! At this moment, a man suddenly shouted from within the demon race. A split second later, twin hammers appeared in his hands. He viciously swung them at the ground. Boom! The hammers smashed into the ground, shattering it into nothingness. Only a single stone was left unscathed by the hammers. It lay peacefully in the huge pit created by the hammers. They found it. Yi Zichen stood within the Yao ceiling pagoda and frowned. Then he heard Chen Jianan's sinister voice from outside. Keep hiding. Since they'd already found him, there was no point in hiding. Yi Zichen simply sent out his divine sense. You've got some skill, huh? You even found me? You're just an Earth Supreme. How far can you possibly hide? If you know what's good for you, hurry up and surrender. Otherwise, even if you resist stubbornly, you won't be able to escape death, said Chen Jianan, his gaze sinister. Chen Jianan's gaze was sinister, and his heart was filled with jealousy. A spatial divine artifact. In the God realm, spatial divine artifacts, especially those that could carry people, were extremely rare. Although he was a 9th stage Sky Supreme, he'd never gotten his hands on one. But this puny Earth Supreme had not only won the Xianyuan sword's favor, but also the protection of a spatial divine artifact. This infuriated him to no end. In the eyes of others, he'd always been a proud son of heaven with heaven-defying luck. But today, in front of Yi Zichen, he was nothing. However, in the face of Chen Jianan's threats, Yi Zichen simply laughed. Do you take me for an idiot? Or is there something wrong with your head? Yi Zichen stood within the Yao ceiling pagoda, his eyes filled with disdain. Do you think I won't die if I go out? If you're so strong, come in and kill me. Chen Jianan's fury reached the heavens. Thunder rumbled through the air, and the winds howled in response to his fury. Chapter 1188. Expensive Demon Avatars, he's scaring me. Did you see that? He's scaring me. Yi Zichen glared at the people around him with an exaggerated expression. Are you kidding me? Am I supposed to be scared? This kind of person is really too despicable. He glared at Chen Jianan, who had a ferocious expression on his face, and sent his spiritual sense out of the Yao ceiling pagoda. Then hurry up and kill me. All right, I'll satisfy you. This time, Chen Jianan couldn't be bothered to waste his breath. He swung his divine sword at Yi Zichen's Yao ceiling pagoda as if his life depended on it. In truth, Yi Zichen felt a little apprehensive. Although he'd been in possession of the Yao ceiling pagoda for a while, he didn't know how strong its defenses were. Dong. When Chen Jianan's first strike landed, the Yao ceiling pagoda was fine. The second strike, the third strike, after chopping for an hour, the Yao ceiling pagoda was still unscathed. Woe, as expected of the 5 elements Great Emperor's Yao ceiling pagoda. As expected of Emperor Hades' handiwork. Not bad. Yi Zichen couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. This sort of astonishing defense made him completely relaxed. Even Chen Jianan, who had been swinging his sword countless times, couldn't keep up with the huge consumption of his divine power. He stopped attacking the Yao ceiling pagoda and took out a pill to recover his divine power. This time, Yi Zichen was a bit unwilling when he saw that the other party had stopped. Can you do it or not? Come in and kill me. Harder. Chen Jianan, who was sitting cross-legged outside recovering his god power, almost lost control of his god power when he heard those words. After a long time, he finally suppressed his anger. After recovering 30% of his divine power, he walked to the Yao ceiling pagoda. However, this time, he did not swing the sword as if his life depended on it. If he could not make this spatial god tool collapse after an hour, then even if he swung the sword for a year, the result would still be the same. The defense of your spatial god artifact is very shocking. Unexpectedly, Chen Jianan was no longer as angry as before. A faint smile appeared on his face as he looked at the speck of dust beneath his feet. With my strength, it would be difficult for me to break through your defense. I admit that. Did he admit defeat? Yi Zichen couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Since you know you can't break it, why aren't you leaving? Do you want to spend the new year with me? If I can't get the Xianyuan sword, of course I won't leave. Chen Jianan said warmly, although I can't break through your defense, you can't escape from me either. If you want to waste time with me, I can stay here to accompany you. As he spoke, Chen Jianan sat cross-legged on the ground and closed his eyes to rest. When the other Supremes heard this, they also came to a realization. They were too focused on what was in front of them, and desperately wanted to break through the Yao ceiling pagoda's defenses and snatch the Xianyuan sword. Not being able to break through the defense made them very depressed, but they had forgotten. They couldn't break through, but there was no way Yi Zichen could leave the pagoda either. The Supremes immediately began to divide up the work. They couldn't keep using their divine senses to lock onto the dust that the Yao ceiling pagoda had turned into. This would be extremely damaging to their minds. However, they might not have much here, but they had a lot of people just change shift. Yi Zichen's smile froze. Sure enough, what he'd been most worried about had happened. These guys wanted to waste time with him. Young master, what should we do now? Meng Huairong and Jiao Qi knit their brows. Yi Zichen licked his lips and glanced at the seated Supremes. All right, didn't you want to waste time? Then go ahead and waste time. So long as I open the second floor, you'll all die. Yi Zichen's eyes flashed with cold light, then he waved his hands and snorted. Find me a quiet room. I'm going into seclusion. Find me one too, said Xianyuan Xiang. Who knows, once I fully fuse with my godhead, I might be of some help to you. Yi Zichen sat cross-legged in his private room. He was currently roughly a first-stage Earth Supreme. Although he'd achieved initial success in the 5 elements, he still couldn't open the second floor. It was obvious that there was a limit to how much power he could use to open the door. Wanting to improve his cultivation through comprehending the Tao arts of the 5 elements was obviously not too realistic under the current circumstances. You want to waste time with me? Yi Zichen rolled his eyes, then took out a pitch-black secret tome. It was none other than the Devil Dharma body he'd stolen from the Warlock in the Time Corridor. Forming a Dharma body was the only way for Supremes to ascend to divinity, but in truth, less than 10% of Supremes could truly form a Dharma body. The resources required to form a Dharma body were simply too vast. Ordinary people couldn't afford it at all. Most of those who could form a Dharma body were descendants of large family clans, or perhaps they'd relied on their own willpower and time to gather the necessary resources. Of course, the higher the investment, the higher the return. Those who could form a Dharma body, even the weakest of Dharma bodies, would be peerless among Supremes. The first thing Yi Zichen saw was the materials he needed to form a Dharma body. Next were the things he needed to pay attention to when forming a Dharma body. 100-tail grass, heavenly god fruit, 10,000-year black jade. The dazzling array of ingredients dazzled Yi Zichen. Even with his vast knowledge and experience, he'd never even heard of many of them. For example, there was one ingredient, devil fruit. Didn't Luffy eat it in one piece? This was a necessary ingredient for forming a devil Dharma body. Didn't that mean that once he used it, his Dharma body would become an eraser? Jiao Qi. There was no point in looking around. Whether or not he could form a Dharma body depended on whether the Yao ceiling pagoda had enough materials. Master. Jiao Qi walked in. Yi Zichen tossed the secret tome into Jiao Qi's hands. Let's see if we have enough materials to form a Dharma body. A devil Dharma body? Jiao Qi arched his brows when he saw the secret tome's cover. There were 108 Dharma bodies. He'd never heard of such a thing before. Then, he took another look at the materials and he was completely dumbfounded. Was he really forming a supreme Dharma body? These materials were enough to form 10 Dharma bodies. As far as he could remember, he'd never seen a Dharma body that required such a huge amount of materials. What's more, the materials were all extremely rare and precious. For example, 10,000-year black jade. Black jade itself was precious, but he needed 10,000-year black jade, and 150 kilograms of it. Heavenly God fruit was an ingredient for refining diviner pills. It could increase a cultivator's chances of breaking through to the diviner level by 30%, but he needed 20 of these precious materials. 200 pieces of 1,000-year divine wood. 6 pieces of exquisite divine ink. 1 for each element of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. 1 for a demon god's heart. Am I dreaming? Even the steady Jiao Qi gasped in shock when he saw these materials. If he sold these materials, even diviners could buy dozens of them as slaves. But these precious materials were only enough to form a Dharma body? Chapter 1189. Closed-door training, young master. After a while, Jiao Qi smiled at Yi Zichen in astonishment. Even though he was a 9th-stage Earth Supreme, his right hand was trembling as he held the Devil Dharma body. Yes, it was really shaking. Even a celestial would tremble in fear at the sight of such an expensive material, let alone a 9th Dan supremacy. Is there a problem? Yi Zichen didn't have a clear definition of the value of these materials. Although there were many materials inside, and he knew that they were expensive, he had never seen the cost of other sovereign celestial bodies, nor did he feel that the cost of his demon celestial body was expensive. Yes. Even if Yi Zichen was the master of the Yao ceiling pagoda, Jiao Qi had no choice but to give this answer without hesitation. Then, he swallowed his saliva and laughed dryly. Young master, your sovereign celestial body shouldn't be within the 108 celestial bodies. What's wrong with that? Yi Zichen didn't understand. Of course, that's not a problem. In the Great Thousand Realms, even a ruler wouldn't dare say that the 108 avatars are all the avatars. There are definitely some that aren't in the rankings, replied Jiao Qi. Then what is your problem? Yi Zichen looked at him. The problem is, the cost of your avatar is too high. As soon as he finished speaking, Jiao Qi, who was not good with words, could no longer keep his mouth shut. For an ordinary Dharmakaya, the black jade is a necessary item, but it's enough if it's 100 years old. A few dozen kilograms is enough. But this avatar of yours needs 150 kilograms of black jade, and it's 10,000 years old. I suspect that the entire god race doesn't even have 500 kilograms of black jade. There's also the 1,000-year-old divine wood and the heavenly god fruit. These are treasures that can be sold for tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of celeste in an auction house, but your avatar is like cabbages. Also, the more Jiao Qi spoke, the more agitated he became. It was as if his mouth could not stop ridiculing. Previously, Yi Zichen didn't know how much the Devil Dharma body cost, but after hearing Jiao Qi's explanation, he had a pretty good idea. However, he understood the principle of high investment and high return. If he could create such a Dharmakaya, it would definitely be stronger than other Dharmakayas. What he needed to know now was whether there were enough materials in the Yao ceiling pagoda. However, before he could say anything, Jiao Qi had already made his decision. There's no way to create this avatar of yours. The Yao ceiling pagoda doesn't have enough resources. Yi Zichen arched his brows. Not enough, definitely not enough. This is only the first floor of the Yao ceiling pagoda, and the beasts imprisoned here are all at the Earth Supreme level. Even materials like the Heavenly God Fruit and the 10,000-year Black Jade would be useless here, said Jiao Qi speechlessly. This reply was like a bolt from the blue to Yi Zichen. Chen Jianan and the others were waiting outside the Yao Ceiling Pagoda like tigers watching their prey. It was obvious that they wouldn't leave until he left. This devil Dharma technique was the only thing he could do in the near future. However, the result Jiao Qi gave him was that he did not have enough materials to forge a Dharma technique. Isn't it over now? Yi Zichen's mouth fell open, but he didn't know what to say. He waved his right hand and a screen appeared in the room. Above the screen was a view of the situation outside the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The divine race, Yao race, and demon race seemed to have reached some kind of agreement, and they really did dispatch people to monitor him. As soon as Yi Zichen spread his divine sense outwards, he sensed several auras locking onto him. Hurry up and come out. The instant he sensed Yi Zichen's divine sense, Chen Jianan said without even opening his eyes. Didn't you want to waste time? Then let's waste time. With that, Yi Zichen retracted his divine sense. His gaze was solemn. He really was in a bit of a pickle now. Jiao Qi. Yes, sir, replied Jiao Qi immediately. Go to the first floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda and bring me all the pills that can increase one's divine power. They're willing to wait, aren't they? Have them stand guard outside. Once I open the second floor, they won't be able to escape. Understood. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. During this time, Yi Zichen hadn't taken even half a step out of his secret room. While he took pills to increase his cultivation, he also studied the Tao of the 5 elements. Jiao Qi, have some fruit. A beautiful woman walked over with a platter of fruit. She was none other than one of the 3 leaders of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda's first floor, Meng Huairong. The Yao Ceiling Pagoda was a separate space, and there were quite a few fruit trees inside. These fruits had been plucked from those trees. You're here. Jiao Qi nodded calmly, then plucked an immortal fruit from the platter. However, he held it in his hand for a long time without putting it into his mouth. Master, you've already been in seclusion for 3 years, haven't you? Asked Jiao Qi. It's been more than 3 years. Meng Huairong nodded. Are you worried about him? At our level, it's possible to go into seclusion for decades or even centuries. He's only been in seclusion for 3 years. What's there to worry about? Of course I'm not worried about him, said Jiao Qi with a frown. I'm worried about the people outside. He glanced at the curtains. Even after 3 years, Chen Jianan and the others were still standing guard outside the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Just let them wait. They can't open the Yao Ceiling Pagoda anyway. But not long ago, I heard one of them say they're going to invite a diviner expert over. The difference between a celestial being and a supreme being is huge. What if they manage to break through the Yao Ceiling Pagoda's defensive restrictions? Jiao Qi said. Diviners? They went looking for them? Meng Huairong was shocked. Outside the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, 3 years had passed, but their obsession with the Xianyuan sword still hadn't worn off. During these 3 years, the Sky Supremes all looked exhausted. Although they'd changed shifts to rest, they'd used their divine sense so much that it wasn't something they could recover from. Among them, Jackdaw was the most energetic. His obsession with the Xianyuan sword wasn't that strong to begin with. His focus was on Chen Jianan and Yin Hu. All he had to do was interrupt them the moment they obtained the Xianyuan sword. How embarrassing! They actually went back to look for reinforcements. Chen Jianan wasn't present. 3 years seemed to have worn away his patience. Not long ago, he'd returned to the God Realm to find his master and break open the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Yin Hu had also notified the Yao diviners. The only ones who hadn't made a move were the demons. Jackdaw, are you sure you don't want the higher-ups to send a diviner down? Asked Cain. What's there to shout about? Even I find it embarrassing to send a diviner, said Jackdaw disdainfully. What, are you worried they'll attack us? Chapter 1190. Not even diviners, it's too late to shout. They're already here. When he sensed their supreme auras, Jackdaw smiled calmly and shrugged. At the same time, he rose to his feet and bowed to the people in the sky. Although he considered everyone beneath his notice, he didn't care about diviners at all. Even so, he still had to abide by the most basic rules. The other Supremes followed Jackdaw's lead and bowed to the sky. Not long after, 3 figures descended from the sky. One of them was Chun Jianan of the Shin race. The other 2 were the diviners he had invited from the Shin race, and the demon race expert Yin who had invited. If I recall correctly, the last time I came to the lower realms was tens of thousands of years ago. The celestial realm expert from the celestial race muttered softly as he took a step forward. His entire person landed right in front of the group of Supremes. Yin who rushed over to greet the Yao diviner. When the 2 diviners landed, they looked at Jackdaw. Sensing the gazes of these 2 celestial beings, the devil race paragons all lowered their heads. "You're Jackdaw, right?" asked the god race diviner. "That's me, senior." Jackdaw looked up at the god race diviner and chuckled. When the diviner noticed his expression, he nodded and smiled. "I never would have guessed the demons would send you. Why didn't I see Han Shi? Brother Chun and Brother Yin have already invited you. You're as strong as my father. If you can break through, even my father wouldn't be able to do anything. If you can't, my father won't be able to do anything. That's why I didn't bother him." Jackdaw laughed. "Your way of thinking is quite strange. The last time I met your father was 100,000 years ago. I thought I'd see him again. Unfortunately, once you return to the demons, send my regards to your father. This junior will remember." As they spoke, the god race diviner said no more to Jackdaw. He'd only said so much to Jackdaw out of respect for Han Shi. The god race diviner smiled at Jackdaw, then turned his gaze to Chun Jianan. "Where is it?" Before they arrived, Chun Jianan had already told them about Yi Zichen's hiding in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Of course, he didn't say it was the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. All he said was that it was an immortal residence with astonishing defenses. Chun Jianan immediately took a few steps forward and spread out his divine sense, locking onto the Yao Ceiling Pagoda that had turned into dust. Right here. The god race divinity easily locked onto the speck of dust. After carefully examining it, he pointed a finger forward. A bolt of lightning suddenly shot out from his fingertip, blasting a large pit in the ground around him, but the dust was still safe and sound. They didn't expect this to be the result. Chun Jianan and the other supreme beings were stunned. Even Jackdaw looked astonished. At the diviner level, one could easily use the laws of the heavenly Tao, and their attacks would be thousands of times stronger than a Sky Supreme's. Before they arrived, Jackdaw was certain that the Yao Ceiling Pagoda would be broken, but he never expected. It was completely intact. Without breaking through the defense of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, the celestial diviner didn't show any signs of uneasiness. On the contrary, he seemed to take it for granted. Suddenly withdrawing his finger, the god race heavenly being said to the demon race heavenly being, "Brother White, give it a try." The Yao race heavenly being was a short, capable man. He rubbed his nose, took a few steps forward, and punched the dust. The dust remained intact. The demon race heavenly being shook his head and walked to the side. "This won't do. The Yao Ceiling Pagoda's defenses really are astonishing. Even with our abilities we can't break through it." "Brother White, you can tell that it's the Yao Ceiling Pagoda too?" The god race diviner raised his eyebrows and smiled. The Yao race diviner nodded. "I can see it. The only thing in the world that can allow living things to live inside and turn into dust is the Yao Ceiling Pagoda." "That's right." The god race heavenly being sighed. "I came here to confirm whether or not it really is the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. It seems I'm right." The 2 diviners ignored Chun Jianan and the others and began chatting among themselves. When the surrounding Supremes heard them mention the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, they stared in astonishment. The Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Could it be the Five Elements' Great Emperor's Yao Ceiling Pagoda? While they were still in shock, the two diviners ended their conversation. The divine race's diviner called Chen Jianan over. "We're preparing to go back. You just came down. Are you going back already?" asked Chen Jianan in shock. "The higher-ups discussed it with the laws, and the condition for us to come down was that we could only launch one attack here. We've already used one attack, so we can't stay here any longer. Besides, this is the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Even if we stay, we won't be able to threaten it in the slightest," said the God Race Heavenly Being. "Then, can we ask a ruler to come down? What are you thinking? Do you have so much free time even as a ruler?" Before Chen Jianan could finish his sentence, the God Race Heavenly Being frowned and berated him. "Anyone stronger than a diviner is under the strict protection of the laws. Us diviners coming down here is already an act of mercy, yet you want a ruler to come down? Then what should we do now?" Chen Jianan knit his brows. He'd already been following Yi Zichen around for 3 years. During that time, he didn't dare cultivate and instead used his divine sense to monitor the situation. He couldn't afford to waste time. "That'll depend on how you handle it." The God Race Heavenly Being patted Chen Jianan on the shoulder. "This is your great fortune. This divine artifact is the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Even the God Emperor values it highly. If you can offer it to the God Emperor." The God Race Heavenly Being hesitated. In the end, he gave Chen Jianan a rather cryptic look, then disappeared from the wilderness with the Yao Race Heavenly Being. "It really is the Five Elements' Great Emperor's Yao Ceiling Pagoda." Chen Jianan's heart was aflame. Only the Five Elements' Great Emperor's Yao Ceiling Pagoda could catch the God Emperor's attention. It was just as the God Race Heavenly Being had said. This was his great fortune. If he could seize this opportunity. But the problem was, Yi Zichen wouldn't come out of the pagoda. "I have to think of a way to force him out," said Chen Jianan to himself. His eyes darted back and forth, and a vicious glint flashed through them. "Guan Yu! Big Brother Jianan!" In response, a 7th-stage Sky Supreme stepped out. Chen Jianan narrowed his eyes, walked up to her, and whispered in her ear for a long time. When he left Guan Yu's ear, he saw her frown. "Big Brother Jianan, when we came down here, Master repeatedly warned us not to make contact with the people of the lower realms. Not only are you making contact with them, but you're also using them to threaten them. If Master found out, he'd be angry." Chapter 1191. Coercion. Although the female Heavenly Supreme was still a little hesitant, she didn't hesitate any longer and disappeared from the wildlands. The God Race's side suddenly made a move. The Demon Races and Devil Races Supremes were all on guard. Now, not only was the Xianyuan sword in front of them, but there was also a chance for them to soar through the ranks. Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Whether it was the God Emperor, Yao Emperor, or Demon Emperor, they all flocked to it. If any of them could deliver the Yao Ceiling Pagoda to an emperor, their future would change drastically. "Brother Jackdaw, should we?" At that moment, a transmission appeared in Jackdaw's mind. He instinctively raised his head and saw Yin-Hu giving him a meaningful look. Jackdaw smiled faintly, maintaining his previous posture. He lowered his head as if drawing circles on the ground. At the same time, he transmitted to Yin-Hu. "Isn't it a little too early to start forming alliances now?" "I don't think it's early." Yin-Hu deliberately hid his emotions. He stared at the ground and said, "The Five Elements' Great Emperor's Yao Ceiling Pagoda is a divine item that can only be found by chance. Tens of thousands of years ago, the Five Elements' Great Emperor used the Yao Ceiling Pagoda to beat us pretty badly. We've only recovered a bit after all these years. If Chen Jianan gives the Yao Ceiling Pagoda to the God Emperor now, then our two races." Yin-Hu didn't finish his sentence, but he trusted that Jackdaw would understand. Jackdaw didn't comment. Tens of thousands of years ago, when the Five Elements' great emperor was still alive, he relied on his Tao heart of the Five Elements and the Yao Ceiling Pagoda to suppress all races. That was the era when the God race was at its peak. Right now, the God Emperor was the strongest of the three races. If the Yao Ceiling Pagoda was given to him, the Yao and Demon races would return to the situation they were in 10,000 years ago. This pagoda could not be given to Chen Jianan. However, Jackdaw was even more curious about who was sealed inside the Yao Ceiling Tower. That was why the Eastern monarch Tai had begged the Five Elements' great emperor 3 times in the past, even going so far as to exhaust his origin energy to fight him. Rumor had it that the Yao emperor didn't want to steal the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Instead, he wanted the Five Elements' great emperor to release one person. Before we join forces, I have a question to ask you. Jackdaw smiled and nodded. Just who is locked up in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda? Why is the Yao Emperor so friendly with it? I don't know either. The Yao Emperor and the Five Elements' great emperor are both supreme experts of our world. How could a mere sky supreme like me possibly know about the secrets between them? However, I heard that there seems to be an old acquaintance of the Demon Emperor locked up there. Yin Hu sent a telepathic message to Zhang Xian after revealing what he knew. Are we going to cooperate or not? Give me a message. All right, I'll cooperate with you this once. Jackdaw was a little disappointed that he hadn't been able to resolve his suspicions. However, he still agreed to cooperate. That's great. If we work together, Chen Jianan will definitely not be our match. Yin Hu glanced in Chen Jianan's direction and said, I just don't know what the people he sent are doing. I just used my divine sense to lock onto her position, but she disappeared halfway. What could he possibly be doing? He's definitely playing some despicable trick. Jackdaw, Chen Jianan, and Yin Hu were actually representatives of their respective races' younger generation. They were all outstanding talents of the younger generation, so they were naturally familiar with each other. However, Jackdaw had always scoffed at Chen Jianan's character. On the surface, he looked cultured and refined, but behind the scenes, he always played dirty tricks. At the end of the day, he was just a sanctimonious person. For example, Chen Jianan had snuck up on the God race's diviner. If Yin Hu and Jackdaw hadn't noticed, the Yao diviner wouldn't have come down. Even so, we still have to be on guard, said Yin Hu. What's there to be on guard for? Can't we just ask? Jackdaw's eyes flashed. He tossed the rock he was fiddling with into the distance and walked over to Chen Jianan. Brother Chen, it seems the Yao and demons have reached some sort of agreement. On the God race's side, the Supreme who'd come down with Chen Jianan walked over to his side. He glanced at the Yao and demons, then frowned and transmitted. When he heard this, Chen Jianan merely smiled calmly. His fingers gently stuck to the gravel on the ground, and he snorted carelessly. Don't worry about them. Even if they join forces, they won't be able to do anything. In the face of absolute strength, no tricks will work. Brother Chen. While Chen Jianan and the God Race Supreme were talking, Jackdaw walked up to them. Just a second ago, Chen Jianan's eyes were as dark as still water. The moment he raised his head, he beamed. Brother Jackdaw. I didn't think we'd run into the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. However, it's no wonder it was the Five Elements' great emperor's proudest divine artifact. Not even a diviner could shake it. That's only natural. If even a diviner could break through the Five Elements' great emperor's divine artifact, then it wouldn't be ranked number 1 on the divine artifact rankings, laughed Chen Jianan. You're right, Brother Chen. Jackdaw smiled noncommittally. The surrounding Yao, God, and Demon Supremes all looked at Chen Jianan and Jackdaw. The agreement they'd reached for the Xianyuan sword had become extremely complicated after the appearance of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Now that Jackdaw had taken the initiative to chat with Chen Jianan, their nerves were stretched taut. Hey, I saw Brother Chun send out a supreme martial artist just now. I wonder what she did? After a brief pause, Jackdaw asked the question straightforwardly. Chun Jianan arched his brows. When he saw Jackdaw's smile, he laughed as well. There's no need to hide it. I sent people out precisely because I thought of a way to force Yi Zichen out. Wasting time with him isn't a long-term solution. With that, the supreme he'd sent returned to the wastelands. As soon as she landed, she sensed the subtle change in the atmosphere. You're back. When Chun Jianan saw her, he didn't bother chatting with Jackdaw. He simply walked over and said, Did you bring them? He waved his hand, and a dozen or so men and women appeared before them. Xueqi, Stone, Xuelan, and the others were among them. Brother Jianan, these are all members of Yi Zichen's faction before he ascended. A few of them are on pretty good terms with him. Not bad. Chun Jianan chuckled. The members of the leisure house, who'd been tied up and unable to speak, were all astonished when they heard Yi Zichen's name. When Chun Jianan took in their expressions, his eyes flashed with cold light. The divine sword he carried with him appeared in his hand, and he brought it to a member's neck. Chapter 1192. Within the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Within the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Yi Zichen was still immersed in cultivation. He'd been in seclusion for 3 years now. During that time, he hadn't taken even half a step out of his secret room. He'd been in deep meditation the entire time. This was the longest seclusion he'd ever spent in his life. Within his spiritual sea, Yi Zichen's soul clone sat cross-legged in the void. As it breathed in and out the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, 5 imprints representing the 5 elements floated in front of it. Fire. The little person with his eyes closed pointed forward, and the fire attribute imprint of the 5 imprints floated in front of him. With a wave of his finger, the void instantly transformed into a sea of flames. The flames burned so fiercely that they seemed capable of melting the heavens and earth. Before long, the sea of flames turned a crystalline blue. At the same time, the temperature of the land of nothingness dropped to 0 due to the burning of the flames. Ice and fire complete. Suddenly, Yi Zichen opened his eyes. After countless simulations, I've only managed to change the fire attribute of the 5 elements a little. If I want to complete the Tao of the 5 elements and condense a Tao heart, who knows how long it'll take. Yi Zichen muttered to himself as he sat in his secret room. He raised his hand, and a crystalline flame appeared in his palm. I never would have guessed that fire's subsequent evolution would no longer be the heat that burns the heavens and earth, but the coldness that freezes mountains and rivers. I'm afraid the pinnacle of fire is ice. Yi Zichen focused his mind and discovered that during his 3 years of seclusion, not only had his fire attribute improved, but his cultivation had also reached the 7th stage Earth Supreme level. Given his current strength, he could already open the 2nd floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Didn't you want to waste time? Wait until I open the 2nd floor, then we can have some fun. When he thought of Chun Jianan's face, Yi Zichen was infuriated. Suppressing others with his power? Coincidentally, he liked it too. He waved his right hand, and a curtain appeared in his secret room, allowing him to see what was happening outside. However, when he saw what was beyond the curtain, his eyes instantly reddened. Outside the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, several members of the leisure house had already died. Judging by the blood on Chun Jianan's sword, he'd most likely killed them himself. His sword was now pressed to Xueqi's neck. Tisk, tsk, tsk. Your Emperor Yi, who you worship as a celestial being, really likes to be a coward. Chun Jianan looked mockingly at Xueqi and the others. His sword had already cut down more than 10 souls. The surrounding god race, demon race, and demon race sky supremes all looked on coldly. In their eyes, Xueqi and the others weren't even living beings. They were nothing more than ants. However, if it were them, they would definitely not do that. For a mighty sky supreme to slaughter celestial immortals and immortal kings was truly beneath his status. Xueqi glared at Chen Jianan with rage in his eyes. There was no fear, only a raging fire burning in his chest. It was just that he couldn't speak or move right now. Otherwise, even if he had to spill blood, he would use his own blood to stain Chen Jianan's body and leave a mark. Yi Zichen, are you coming out or not? Chen Jianan calmly looked at the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. I heard that you're the savior of this world. Now that the world needs you again, shouldn't you, the savior, come out and show yourself? If you don't answer, I'm going to keep attacking. Chen Jianan smiled playfully at the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Suddenly, a furious roar boomed through the wastelands like thunder. Stop! Xueqi's sword stopped in its tracks. When the survivors heard this roar, their faces lit up with delight. Chen Jianan turned to face the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. You've finally spoken. It seems the world's savior still has some conscience. Of course I do, but I'm afraid a dog ate your conscience. Yi Zichen's transmission reverberated throughout the wasteland. You're a mighty sky supreme, yet you're lowering yourself to fight celestial immortals and immortal kings. Don't you feel ashamed? What's there to feel ashamed about? They can only blame themselves for being weak. Isn't it only natural that the weak get killed? Snorted Chen Jianan. Within the secret room, Yi Zichen was trembling from head to toe. He clenched his fists so hard his knuckles cracked, then transmitted outside. You just want me to leave, right? Fine, I'll leave right now, but you'd best not attack anyone else. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. I await your arrival, said Chen Jianan. Bang! Yi Zichen's fist slammed into the secret room's wall. Everyone on the first floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda felt it. Yi Zichen's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the headless corpse of his old friend, then pushed the door open. He saw Meng Huairong standing outside, looking at him with an anxious expression on her face. All right, I got it. Yi Zichen turned back indifferently, then headed straight for the entrance to the second floor. The entrance to the second floor wasn't blocked by a door like the first. It was a small mountain that completely sealed off the entrance. There was a stone slab in the center of the mountain. Yi Zichen lifted his hand and placed it on top. All of a sudden, the 5 elemental markings on the slate lit up. When he'd tried to open the second floor, he'd been stuck here. Lighting up the slab meant that he'd comprehended enough of the Tao of the 5 elements. However, after that, he'd have to use his own strength to break through the mountain. He clenched his right hand into a fist, which crackled with lightning. Yi Zichen gathered his energy in his dantian, took a horse stance, and punched the small mountain. Crack! The small mountain blocking the entrance to the second floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda instantly cracked where Yi Zichen's fist landed. The cracks spread outwards until finally, it shattered into countless pieces of rock. As soon as the rocks touched the ground, they disappeared. The master opened the entrance to the second floor. Meng Huairong looked at Jiao Qi dejectedly and pursed her lip. I really don't know whether to congratulate the master or feel sorry for us. We should congratulate the master. Jiao Qi said with a meticulous expression, you should be able to sense it. Our cultivation speed is too inferior to the young master's. Although the young master has yet to reach the heavenly sovereign realm, it's just a matter of time before he leaves us in the dust. If we want the master to use us, the only way is to focus on cultivation. I trust the master won't forget about us. That's true, laughed Meng Huairong. As Meng Huairong and Jiao Qi conversed, Yi Zichen retracted his fist, reached out, and pushed the door behind the artificial mountain. There was no resistance at all. When he pushed the door open, he was greeted by an otherworldly scene. However, to Yi Zichen's shock, the instant he pushed open the door, he saw tens of thousands of Yao prostrating themselves on the ground. Then, as soon as he entered the second floor, they all shouted in unison, Come! Chapter 1193. You're really despicable. How despicable! In order to force Yi Zichen out of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, He'd lowered himself to threaten him with his friends and family. Even the demons despised such methods. In order to force Yi Zichen out of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, they'd lowered themselves to threaten him with their friends and family. Even demons despised such methods. The people of the demon race were indeed vicious and merciless people. They were bloodthirsty and warlike, and revered plundering and invasion. They weren't like the gods, they were a bunch of sanctimonious people. Even so, Chen Jiannan's actions had refreshed their understanding of the gods. In particular, Chen Jiannan's actions had refreshed the Yao and demon race's understanding of the god race. Chen Jiannan didn't care about Jackdaw's mockery. That's despicable. If Yi Zichen hadn't holed up in there for 3 years, I wouldn't have resorted to this. Besides, our ultimate goal is to force him out. As for what methods we used, what's the point? Even at a time like this, you can still speak so confidently. I truly admire you, as well as the entire god race. Jackdaw cupped his hands at Chen Jiannan with a hidden meaning. When the surrounding Supremes heard this, they blushed a little. Chen Jiannan's methods were simply too despicable. Chen Jiannan acted as if he hadn't heard at all. He calmly watched the Yao Ceiling Pagoda transform into a speck of dust. Time slowly passed. Half an hour had passed since Yi Zichen's transmission. After such a long wait, a sinister light flashed through Chen Jiannan's eyes. If you're trying to buy time like this, I advise you to give up on that idea. His divine sword once more fell to Xueqi's neck. If you want to live, hurry up and get Yi Zichen out of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. You've probably seen what happened to the others. By unlocking Xueqi's mute acupoint, Chen Jiannan wanted to use this method to force Yi Zichen out of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda as soon as possible. Little did he know. Brother Yi, don't worry about us. Xueqi roared at the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Although he didn't know how strong their captors were, if they could force Yi Zichen to cower in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, they had to be someone he couldn't fight. Xueqi didn't want to harm Yi Zichen because of him. Of course, besides him, Stone, Xuelan, and the others hadn't made their stand clear, but he believed that they definitely had the same thoughts as him. If not, then let them blame themselves. You're courting death. Chen Jiannan hadn't expected Xueqi to say such a thing. His face turned ashen, and he swung his sword at Xueqi's head. Rumble. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning descended from the heavens and landed squarely on Xueqi's sword, causing it to deviate slightly and cutting off a strand of Xueqi's hair. I warned you, if you dare to make a move against anyone, you'll have to bear the consequences. A deep, angry roar exploded in everyone's ears. For a moment, the sky turned dark and the earth turned dark. Everyone saw that the sky was closed down by the sea of thunder. Thunder rumbled continuously in the sea of thunder. Countless bolts of heavenly thunder devoured each other and turned into roaring divine dragons that soared above the 9 heavens. Yi Zichen stood alone, surrounded by the Yao, demon, and god race supremes. His pitch-black eyes flickered with lightning, and lightning crackled endlessly from them. Snakes of lightning snaked around him, resonating with the sea of lightning. They didn't know why, but the surrounding Supremes felt a faint sense of pressure from Yi Zichen. Before, they might have been able to rely on their cultivation to fight Yi Zichen's arts of the 5 elements, but now, they had less than a 10% chance of winning against any one of them. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. It had only been 3 years. In 3 short years, he'd undergone such a qualitative transformation. If he had enough time, who knew how far he'd go? Some of the Supremes rejoiced that Chen Jiannan had forced Yi Zichen out of hiding. If they'd allowed him to do as he pleased, they might have all died along with him. The surrounding Supremes all had different thoughts. Chen Jiannan, Jackdaw, and Yin, who were no exception. The Yi Zichen before them was completely different from the Yi Zichen they'd first seen. That sea of lightning, in particular, had shaken Chen Jiannan to no end. It was almost 1/10 the size of their clan's lightning pool. Could it be that in the past 3 years, Yi Zichen's comprehension of lightning had broken through yet again? Just as Chen Jianan recovered from his shock, the sea of lightning blazed with raging flames once more. The sea of fire and the sea of lightning merged with each other. Gradually, those lightning dragons that soared in the sky began to burn with icy blue flames. Lightning and fire fused together. This time, it wasn't just Chen Jianan, even Jackdaw was astonished. Fusing different elements was extremely difficult. Just how monstrous was Yi Zichen's talent? He'd reached this level in just 3 years. Furthermore, that fire was clearly ice fire. That was a mutation that could only occur if one's comprehension of fire reached an extremely high level. Gradually, Yi Zichen's black robes changed. They were no longer pure black. Instead, a roaring lightning dragon appeared, its eyes wide open. It was a majestic aura. Lightning gathered above his head, forming a crown. Instantly, the aura of a king filled the wastelands. They couldn't let Yi Zichen's arrogance continue to grow. You've improved quite a bit in the past 3 years. After a brief moment of shock, Chen Jianan broke the deathly silence. If they let Yi Zichen continue, their morale would be severely affected. Isn't this all thanks to you? Yi Zichen seemed to have transformed into a god of lightning. His every word was like heavenly thunder, booming in the ears of the surrounding Supremes. The surrounding Supremes' hearts trembled with fear. They looked at Yi Zichen as fearfully and uneasily as if he were their emperor. Then, they heard him speak again. Back then, you said you wanted to play it out with me. Now, you're using my friend to threaten me into leaving the Yaoxiling Pagoda. Fine, I'm standing right in front of you now. What do you have to say? His confident tone and gaze shocked Chen Jianan and the others. However, as Sky Supremes, their Tao hearts weren't so easily destroyed. Do you really think you're invincible just because you broke through? I can't be bothered to waste my breath on you. Hand over the Xianyuan sword and Yaoxiling Pagoda, and I'll leave your corpse intact. Chapter 1194. Battle Chen Jianan. Chapter 1194. Battle Chen Jianan. Yi Zichen's domineering aura was displayed to its fullest extent. When he reached out with his right hand, he held his left hand behind his back. His calm gaze was filled with undisguised contempt. Then I won't hold back. As soon as Yi Zichen said that, Chen Jianan's figure flashed. In the blink of an eye, he'd advanced 100 meters. Yi Zichen held the Yaoxiling Pagoda in his hand, but he didn't budge. Instead, he kept his right hand outstretched, waiting for Chen Jianan to arrive. However, just as Chen Jianan was about 10 meters away from Yi Zichen, the Thunder Flame Dragon roared through the air. Humph! Chen Jianan instantly tossed his divine sword into the air. Lightning flickered within the divine sword, forming an impenetrable net above his head. The moment Lei Fire Dragon entered the net, the lightning net contracted and trapped Lei Fire Dragon within. After capturing the Thunder Flame Dragon, Chen Jianan sneered disdainfully. So what if his aura was boundless? In the face of absolute strength, a paper tiger was nothing but a paper tiger. Is that all you've got? Little did he know, the trapped Thunder Flame Dragon was still roaring within the net. As it struggled, a wave of frigid air emanated from its body. Icy blue flames clung to the lightning net and burned fiercely. In the blink of an eye, the net made of lightning completely froze the icy blue flames. Then it melted. Roar! The Thunder Dragon broke free of the net, opened its mouth wide, and tried to swallow Chen Jianan whole. This scene caused Chen Jianan to furrow his brows. However, the clumsy Lei Yen dragon did not succeed even though he had forewarned it. The dragon's breath landed on his body, causing a thin layer of ice to form on his clothes. Chen Jianan's divine sword then cut it in half. Nice. The surrounding Supremes couldn't help but cheer. Just now, they'd been worried for Chen Jianan. Is that all you've got? Chen Jianan swung his sword, then regained his former arrogance. His eyes were filled with playfulness and disdain. Is there a need to get so excited just because you killed one? Yi Zichen smiled calmly, then arched his brows at the sky. The thunder flame dragons that were swimming in the thunder flame sea turned into ferocious beasts that roared at Chen Jianan with boundless might. Chen Jianan's expression turned grave as he watched the thunder fire dragon descend from the heavens. His finger brushed the edge of the sword, causing a drop of blood to drip from his cut finger. The blood flowed along the edge of the sword and onto the hilt. After Chen Jianan swallowed the essence blood, a strange light flashed across the sword hilt. Then, he turned into a beam of light that shot through the sky. So fast. Within the wasteland, the Supremes could only see a white meteor-like beam of light shuttling around the thunder flame dragon. The lightning flame dragons either spat out icy flames or lightning explosions. For a time, the entire sky was devoid of light, and it was extremely dazzling. Not long after, the thunder flame dragon in the sky finally caught Chen Jianan's trail. A bolt of lightning struck him, causing him to fall heavily from the sky to the ground. Profound thunderstorm sword. The moment Chen Jianan landed on the ground, everyone heard him shout. Suddenly, more than a dozen magic arrays appeared in the sky. These magic arrays sealed off all the thunder fire dragons in the sky. Countless lightning swords rained down from the magic arrays and bombarded the thunder fire dragons. I didn't know he had this trick up his sleeve. As he watched the rain of lightning fall from the sky, Yin Hu's gaze grew solemn. They'd never heard of this profound technique, nor had they ever seen Chen Jianan use it. Judging from the power of the sword rain, even Yin Hu would be heavily injured if he was caught off guard. As the sword rain passed, the thunder flame dragons scattered. After crashing to the ground, Chen Jianan gasped for breath as he crawled to his feet. The thunderstorm sword had always been his trump card. He'd used it to catch Jackdaw and Yin Hu off guard when they fought. However, there was nothing he could do now. If there were only 1 or 2 thunder flame dragons, he'd have an easier time dealing with them. That was a total of 30 thunder fire dragons. Even without the thunderclap sword storm, he would have been severely injured by that group of thunder fire dragons. Back then, although he'd used this trump card, the thunder flame dragons in the Sea of Lightning had all scattered. These thunder flame dragons were most likely Yi Zichen's trump card. Once he dealt with them, he wouldn't be able to cause any more trouble. As for Jackdaw and Yin Hu, he had plenty of other methods to deal with them. He touched his cheek. Just now, the thunder flame dragon's thunderstorm had landed on the left side of his face. A wisp of red appeared on his finger, and the viciousness in his eyes intensified. Is that all you've got? Even Yi Zichen had to admit that Chen Jianan had some skill. He was well aware of the Lei Fire Dragon's power. After fusing with the ice and fire, the Lei Fire Dragon's fighting strength wasn't any weaker than a heavenly sovereign. Chen Jianan had used a single profound technique to wipe out 30 thunder flame dragons. He was very strong. Not bad. Yi Zichen nodded at Chen Jianan and smiled confidently. Your thunderstorm profound technique is more than enough to prove your status among Sky Supremes. Yi Zichen's tone was that of a senior appreciating a junior. Chen Jianan's gaze darkened even more. He narrowed his eyes and laughed, then said the same thing. Your thunder flame dragons are more than enough to prove your status among Earth Supremes. An Earth Supreme against a 9th stage Sky Supreme. You're also a monster. When they heard their conversation, the surrounding Sky Supremes' hearts trembled. If Chen Jianan hadn't mentioned it, they might have forgotten that Yi Zichen was just an Earth Supreme. The difference between Earth and Sky Supremes was like a chasm, yet Yi Zichen had single-handedly forced Chen Jianan, a 9th stage Sky Supreme, to unleash his profound technique. The difference between Earth and Sky Supremes was like a chasm, yet Yi Zichen had single-handedly forced Chen Jianan, a 9th stage Sky Supreme, to unleash his profound technique. Alright, now be a good boy and hand over the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Chen Jianan took a pill and slowly approached Yi Zichen. Didn't I say the Yao Ceiling Pagoda was right here? Come and take it. Yi Zichen's expression was as calm as ever as he hefted the pagoda. His confident smile caused the surrounding Sky Supremes to frown despite themselves. Could it be that he still had more trump cards up his sleeve? It was said that the Tao of the 5 elements complemented each other. He'd just unleashed lightning and fire. Could it be that he'd gained new insights into wind, rain, and lightning as well? That was what the other Supremes thought, but Chen Jianan didn't believe it. In just 3 years, Yi Zichen had broken through in the 5 elements. Fusing fire and lightning was already difficult enough. He refused to believe that Yi Zichen had broken through in the other elements as well. Don't try to intimidate me. If you can fuse the other elements, I'll leave the Yao Ceiling Pagoda to you. I'll take my people and leave right now, snorted Chen Jianan disdainfully. Come and take it. You're just playing tricks. Chen Jianan didn't believe it. He charged forward without hesitation, but before he'd even taken a few steps, he sensed dozens of terrifying auras appear in the wilderness. At the same time, Yi Zichen smiled calmly. Chapter 1195. Kill them all. Suddenly, the sky darkened. The pool of lightning in the sky faded, and the icy blue flames dissipated. What appeared in the wilderness was an army of demons that covered the sky and covered the earth, flying through the air. The instant they appeared, the Wildlands Sky Supremes sensed at least a dozen similar or even stronger auras lock onto them. Jackdaw, Yin Hu, and Chen Jianan, the strongest of the 3 major powers, were the ones who received the most attention. All the Sky Supremes tensed up, including Jackdaw, who'd been indolent from start to finish. When the Yao 9th and 8th stage Sky Supremes locked onto him, his expression turned grave. Yin Hu! In practically an instant, Chen Jianan turned and roared at Yin Hu. The other demon and god race experts did the same. Their faces were ashen as they stared at the Yao. Shockingly, the Yao's aura had locked onto them. The 3 factions often clashed with each other, so how could they not sense the Yao experts in the sky? Their numbers blotted out the sky. There were at least 100 of them. Moreover, even the weakest of them was a 7th stage Sky Supreme. You Yao really are trustworthy, roared Chen Jianan. Before they arrived, the top experts of the 3 factions had reached an agreement. Each faction could send no more than 15 Sky Supremes, and only 1 9th stage Sky Supreme. The rest of the experts would be sent from their peak clans. But now, the Yao in the sky were clearly telling them that the Yao had broken their agreement. Those aren't our people, explained Yin Hu frantically. Then could they be our people? Roared Chen Jianan. By now, he was genuinely afraid. Most Yao who could break through to the Sky Supreme level were divine beasts. Divine beasts were blessed with innate physical advantages. Although gods who'd undergone divine tribulation could contend with divine beasts, not just anyone could undergo divine tribulation. Take Chen Jianan, for example. Even though he was a monstrous son of heaven and his fame had spread far and wide, he'd yet to truly transcend the god realm and condense his godhead. Earlier, he'd expended a great deal of energy dealing with Yi Zichen's Tao of lightning and fire. Now that he was up against a 9th stage Sky Supreme and several 8th stage demon race experts, he had no chance of winning. Yin Hu, your demon race has won this time. We will withdraw from the fight for the Xianyuan sword and the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Now have your people back off and let us go. As for your betrayal, I'll report it to God Emperor Bing and Thunder Monarch when I get back. This wasn't the time to be a hero. Chen Jianan was more concerned about the lives of these people. It really wasn't me. Yin Hu didn't know how to explain himself. Yin Hu. Chen Jianan's eyes were bloodshot. He gripped his divine sword tightly in his hand. Do you want to kill us all here? Do you dare? Chen Jianan wouldn't let go of Yin Hu. Meanwhile, on the demon side, Jackdaw watched the Yao in the sky with a grave expression. He took in Yin Hu's expression and every little move he made. Jackdaw's gaze flickered back and forth between Yin Hu and the Yao. Something's not right. They shouldn't be Yin Hu's people. Chen Jianan, you've misunderstood him. That's right, they weren't our people to begin with. When he heard that Jackdaw was actually speaking up for him, Yin Hu furrowed his brows. They've already locked onto our people. What's more, the Emperor and the rules discussed this beforehand. How could we have sent so many people without your knowledge? Then who could it be? Chen Jianan narrowed his eyes. I know what sort of agreement you two came to. Do you think I'd believe you if you spoke up for him? Don't forget, we have the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. In response to Chen Jianan's suspicions, Jackdaw smirked coldly, then glanced at the smiling Yi Zichen. It was also at this moment that the other supreme beings turned their gazes over. So, you didn't start fighting? What a shame. I thought you'd fight amongst yourselves. Yi Zichen pulled out a chair from somewhere and sat down. He leisurely crossed his legs and sipped his wine. Two beautiful 8th-stage Sky Supreme women stood by his side, waiting on him. When he sensed their auras, Chen Jianan's pupils constricted. Blue veins bulged on his forehead as he pointed at Yi Zichen and roared, "It's you! It's you!" The instant he pointed at Yi Zichen, the two women's gazes turned cold, and they melted into the darkness. Inexplicably, Chen Jianan felt a wave of frigid energy seep into his body from the soles of his feet. His body froze for half a second because of the chill, and it was also in this half a second that a cold light flashed in front of him. When everyone came back to their senses, they saw that the finger he had extended had already left his hand and landed on the ground. Even more frightening, Chen Jianan didn't feel any pain at all. His blood was sealed in a layer of ice. It wasn't until the two women returned to Yi Zichen's side that he felt a heart-wrenching pain. "I'm truly sorry. I didn't restrain my subordinates well enough, and they broke your finger. It must hurt, right?" Yi Zichen cocked his head and smiled calmly. Shadow charms. One of the Yao recognized the two women's true forms. His eyes trembled. Didn't they say shadow charms went extinct during the Great War of Gods and Demons? Why do they still exist? In truth, shadow charms weren't Yao, but they were classified as such. Any adult shadow charm was a qualified assassin. During the Great War of Gods and Demons, a half-step ruler ancestor of the shadow charms used their race's concealment and assassination techniques to kill multiple demon rulers without fail. The demon emperor was enraged and personally exterminated the shadow charms. Since then, the demon clan had never seen the existence of Ing Mei again. Quite a few demon experts widened their eyes in shock. Although they hadn't experienced the shadow charms assassination, they'd left a mark on their history. Yi Zichen! Yi Zichen! Chen Jianan, who'd lost a finger, roared madly. He sealed his finger's acupoints, but his gaze was inexplicably playful. With the Yao of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda around, I really can't do anything to you. But so what? Do you dare touch a single one of us? The Sky Supremes here are the elites of the three realms' major factions. If you kill us, you'll offend the entire three realms. In the future, you'll have to bear the wrath of every major faction in the three realms. You'll never be able to rest in peace. Humph, you're just bluffing. If I really let you kill us, would you dare? Did you know? That's what your junior apprentice brother, Xiao Hu, said back then. Yi Zichen's smile suddenly faded, and he roared at the Yao in the sky. Chapter 1196. Are you angry? Don't you dare. Chen Jianan pressed his divine sword to Xueqi's neck. His expression was dark and sinister. Tell your people to stand down or they'll all die. The surrounding Supreme's eyes shone with faint hope. They no longer felt that Chen Jianan's methods were despicable. On the contrary, they rejoiced that they still had bargaining chip. However, to their despair, Yi Zichen merely glanced at them, then turned to the Yao in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda and gestured. Kill them! Do you want them to die? Chen Jianan's eyes were bloodshot, but he didn't dare attack Xueqi or the others. This was their final bargaining chip. If he really killed them, then they... At that moment, Xueqi, Stone, and Xuelan stepped out from behind Yi Zichen. When he saw this, Chen Jianan's eyes filled with terror. He swung his sword viciously, but his opponent was nothing more than a pile of dirt. Are you in despair? Yi Zichen laughed like a demon. He looked at Chen Jianan with ridicule. Despite his panic, Chen Jianan refused to believe his luck and looked at the others. They were all just pieces of wood. No one knew when Yi Zichen had swapped Xue Qi and the others, but all the Supremes knew that they'd lost all bargaining chip. Master, save me! Suddenly, Chen Jianan's divine sword split in two. A wisp of a soul emerged from the divine sword. The Deva soul that came out of the blade began to devour the surrounding natural energy, which made the natural energy in the entire three lower realms much thinner. Once the soul devoured the energy, it gradually condensed into a human figure. It was none other than Shao Hu of the God Race's Lightning Emperor. The surrounding Supremes froze. When Jackdaw and Yin Hu saw this, their expressions flickered. They glared at Chen Jianan and the gods, fury in their eyes. To think that the gods would go so far as to seal a strand of Shao Hu's diviner soul inside the Xianyuan sword. If Chen Jianan had suddenly summoned Shao Hu while they were fighting, the Yaoan demons would have been completely annihilated. Don't underestimate this strand of soul. Even if it was only a tenth of Shao Hu's strength, it was still enough to destroy the heavens and earth. Shao Hu. Yi Zichen raised his eyebrows when he saw Shao Hu emerge from the sword, then turned to the two flirtatious women beside him. He's the Deva aura you were talking about. Yes. The two women nodded at the same time. For the sake of obtaining the Xianyuan sword, they really spared no effort. Yi Zichen snorted darkly, but the seriousness in his eyes only grew more obvious. Kid, we really are fated to meet again in such a short time. Shao Hu was wearing an orange-yellow robe, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. The moment he appeared, the demons in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda stopped as well. They could feel the strength of this person's aura. It was so strong that they could not fight against him. Everyone enter the tower. With Shao Hu present, Yi Zichen knew full well that the Yao in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda were no match for him. In order to avoid casualties, Yi Zichen immediately recalled them back into the pagoda. As for facing Shao Hu, he wasn't afraid at all. At most, he would just hide in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Once he cultivated for a few hundred years, he'd come out and smash Shao Hu into a meat patty. Shao Hu watched the Yao disappear one by one, but ignored them. He simply smiled calmly at Yi Zichen. I never would have guessed the Yao Ceiling Pagoda was in your hands. If I'd known, I would have captured you even if it meant falling out with the Sea of Innocence. For better or for worse, you're a diviner. Why are you always acting like you have nothing better to do? You were Xiao Zhan's nanny for a while, and now you're Chen Jianan's nanny. Aren't you tired? Mocked Yi Zichen. Humph, you're still as sharp-tongued as ever, but last time, the Sea of Innocence saved you. This time, Shao Hu's aura surged. In his fury, the surrounding mountains crumbled, the earth cracked, and the rivers flowed in reverse. Yi Zichen instinctively gulped. He was already prepared to dive back into the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. This time I saved him. Aren't you angry? Inexplicably, bell-like laughter rang out from the wastelands. Everyone looked into the distance and saw a phoenix carriage flying over from the horizon. The phoenix carriage was pulled by 8 spectral horses, and the horses' footprints left clusters of dark blue flames in the air. In the blink of an eye, the carriage arrived in front of them. I'm so tired from all the traveling. The phoenix carriage's curtains were pulled open, and a woman stepped out. She was yawning and exhausted. Qi Mei. Yi Zichen, who was just about to enter the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, stopped. The woman giggled, ran up to him, and hugged his arm. Sweetie, you're not hurt, are you? It's been so long since I last saw you. You've gotten thinner. At the same time, Yin Hu and the other Yao knelt to the ground. My lord. At ease. Qi Mei waved at Yin Hu and the others, then blinked her large, bright eyes and smiled with dimples. Sweetie, I've missed you so much. You. Who exactly are you? Yi Zichen furrowed his brows. Just now, he'd clearly heard Yin Hu and the others call her Lord. This was no ordinary superior-subordinate relationship. It was more like the relationship between master and servant. I'll tell you later. Right now I have to deal with this reckless bastard. Chi Mei let go of Yi Zichen's arm and stepped forward. Xiao Hu, who just threatened to kill Yi Zichen, looked as if he'd been nailed to the ground. Are you angry? Chi Mei cocked her head to the side and smiled. Of all the people you could have provoked, you had to provoke my sweetie. The god race and devil race's supremes stared blankly at the scene unfolding before them. They were shocked that Xiao Hu, a half-step sovereign realm expert, couldn't even move in front of Chi Mei. Even if this was just a wisp of his soul, he was still a peak diviner expert. You know what? I hate your Xiao family the most, yet you dared provoke my sweetie? Then, leave this wisp of your soul behind. As soon as he finished speaking, a hunchbacked old man with grizzled hair suddenly appeared in everyone's line of sight. They couldn't sense any fluctuations of divine power from him. He looked just like an ordinary old man, but that was precisely what terrified them the most. For someone to appear so stealthily in front of them, there was no way he was an ordinary person. But any expert, no matter how well they hid themselves, would always reveal their aura. If this old man could conceal himself so well, there was only one possibility.